Absolutely they are. Absolutely they are. Or whatever weird spirits. I mean, if we're going to get Warhammer 40,000 about it, whatever spirits exist within the machine.
Yes. I think they discovered during the Dark Age of Mankind, that's a bit of a problem with machines in the Warhammer 40,000 universe.
I just love the ambiguity of it. Like, when they say machine spirits, do they actually mean that there is literally some kind of metaphysical entity, or is it an AI, or is it just superstition? Are they just talking about the way the machine works? And it does, and they've just interpreted when the machines don't work. Oh, the machine spirit is unhappy. It's not that we don't know how it works. The machine spirit's just unhappy.
I mean, it begins with the Asimov stuff about sort of technology seeming like magic. It's sort of yeah. But I like it because they've got that stuff that they take from Frank Herbert as well, the Butleyan Jihad and such. Mm-hmm. They do the exact same narrative, and that's the great thing about 40k. Of course, it's a grab bag of so many
everything you can possibly imagine. 2000 AD, Lovecraft, Moorcock, everything just chucked together. I mean, I was reading recently one of the Black Library novels. I was reading one of the Primarch books, Conrad Kurtz, about Night Haunter by Guy Haley. And I mean, Conrad Kurtz is great because, of course, I mean, he's Heart of Darkness, he's Batman, he's Judge Dredd, he's so many different things. All three. He's also, though, what we would call a serial killer now. You know, a psychopath. He is an actual. He is that archetype, but crafted in this immortal, indestructible body where he has ultimate freedom and can do whatever he likes. There is an ultimate horror to Conrad Kurtz. I mean, what I love about the Night Lords and Conrad Kurtz in particular is they are completely shorn of ideology, unlike all of the other Space Marine legions and chapters and war bands. They just don't care. Everything is nihilism. They just do not care about anything. They're just super sadists. They only care about their own fulfillment, and that comes from inflicting pain on other things.
I mean, I always get the sense with Kurtz that like it's a sort of horror of a successful megalomaniac. Like there's just nothing else after that success. You know, he kind of finds the universe bitterly empty because the one project he could have, which was becoming a god, was kind of just granted to him from the beginning.
Right, and there's that horrible fatalism about him as well. I mean, he has those precognitive visions where he only sees the darkest of any possible future. So he kind of knows that the heresy is going to happen. He knows what's going to happen regarding the Emperor. He knows that Horus is going to lose, so even that project is going to fail. And he just surrenders to that. He surrenders to the inevitability of it. The book is excellent. I've got to say, it's one of the better of the Black Library novels. It's told in retrospect, and it's Night Haunter talking to himself. He's basically, it's about 500 years after the end of the heresy, and the Night Lords have gathered on this hideous world called Sagawalsa or something wonderfully unpronounceable. And the Night Haunter himself is this gibbering, mutated, insane wreck. And he's crafted a proxy for the Emperor out of the still living bits of victims. And he's talking to it, and he's calling it father, and he's basically asking it questions and confessing, telling his story to it, and it's quite wonderful.
That does. I haven't read enough of the Black Library stuff. I've sort of read bits here and there, but I've never read
it's one of those things where there are so many different writers writing under that banner that there's some good and there's some bad. There's some that's of it's very pulpy, and that's absolutely fine. There's a lot of what people call the bolter porn, which is basically just the war stuff. It describes what happens in the game, really. It's just it's describing conflict essentially, and some of that's very good. Some of it's actually really good, but for me the better ones are the ones that really go deep into the psychology of characters or the mythology of the 40k universe. Quite a lot of the more prominent writers now do that. That seems to be what they're interested in, and that seems to be what sells. That's what the appetite is for. That people want deep dives into the personalities of the 40K universe. So they don't want the archetypes anymore. They want a character, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I expect that because, you know, the Boltapod stuff is kind of interchangeable. Like, you know, you wouldn't even necessarily have to buy many of them. You could just reread them and you have the same story sort of. Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah.
And they're kind of glorified battle reports, as you say. Like, you almost get a sense that, I mean, they read a lot like the battle reports in White Dwarf, of course.
Very much.
Some of the same people, so that's not too surprising.
I mean, don't get me wrong, some of that stuff is very good. Some of the writers are very good at describing, like, naval warfare.
It takes skill, because you've got to have that sense of, I mean, I think with action, and I you know, as an editor, I can tell when people are sort of struggling with this. Sometimes quite good writers who haven't really done that. There's often a difficulty in describing physical space and time in a way that makes sense. Like, it actually takes a lot to see a space in your head and then describe it purely with prose.
Right.
It's coherent. A lot of literary authors, I think, aren't especially good at it. I mean, like, an exception would be Cormac McCarthy, who that's fantastic at, like, action and space and how those dynamics work, whilst retaining his highly literary, slightly highly wrought prose style. But it's a rarity.
It is a rarity, and I mean, with settings like 40K, you've got an added problem, which is you're often describing situations which are fantastical, which they have real world analogs, but they're only analogs. They like when you're doing void warfare, ship to ship warfare in space. There's so much that you're taking into account there in terms of the physics and the physical space of the void. It's rather problematic, isn't it? It's rather tricky.
And the thing there is like the temptation, I guess, of expository dumps and just describing things abstractly. And I guess it takes a certain degree of a kind of poetic sensibility to do that. It's all about sort of what's elliptical, how you can suggest things.
Right. I mean, the one I always come back to is, and it's almost cliche at this point, because it seems to me that most people regard him as like the apex of the Black Library authors, but Aaron Dembski Bowden, or ADB as he's known online, he is fantastic at that. I mean, really fantastic. He somehow manages to describe the minutiae of what's going on aboard these ridiculously enormous vessels, where they only move like incrementally, because you've got literally millions of people and crew people performing actions in order to get them to just turn in increments or to pivot in place or whatever. But he manages to describe all of this minutiae and also the more macro setting of what's happening really, really effectively. And intersperses it with character moments, with the more literary stuff as well. That's a gift. That's a real gift.
Yeah, being able to describe things at scale like that, and in metaphysical sort of blown up ways, and then to be able to zero down. I think that's something Mervyn Peake was very good at. I mean, I always come back to
space. I mean, was there ever a better writer that? I mean, the thing with Mervyn Peake I find with space is that he lets you do it. It's really clever. He does describe physically what's there, but it's often very poetic, kind of abstract in a way, and he lets you imagine the space by giving you impressions.
Yeah, he's an atmospheric writer. He's really interested in how. I mean, I think that's why he's got that kind of Dickensian quality where all of the different elements that go into something sort of lend to the overarching aesthetic. So even the names and that kind of sense of things, like there's nothing that's wasted in a way that doesn't build up atmosphere. Everything ultimately serves building up atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, everything collapses into atmosphere towards the end of his literary life. I mean, when you read Titus Alone, all of the plot elements that were kind of prevalent in Titus Groan and Gormenghast are gone, and it's just pure atmosphere. There is actually nothing else. It's impressionistic in a way.
It almost, I mean, that stage of his writing, it almost feels like Kafka in that way. It's that
very much so.
It's got that that surrealism that it defies anything else. And I think that was always there in his books, but it becomes just, as you say, completely concentrated. Absolutely.
Well, it overtakes everything else. I mean, plot is almost entirely absent in Titus Alone, almost entirely absent. It even does this very strange thing of shifting perspectives all the time. So it is ostensibly told from the perspective of Titus, but there you get these very strange asides where it just skips to another character who's only just turned up. You don't know who this character is, and it will start describing their lives and their experience of this very strange world, which doesn't seem to be a real world at all, but a kind of fantastical analog for modernism slipping into post-modernity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if the first two are, sort of with, I mean, in a way, Steerpike sort of represents modernity coming into being, but of course he's also a product of the world he's in, and I think there's a kind of sense that he's almost a symptom. Modernity is almost a symptom of well, I mean, in Marxist terms, I guess the contradictions of the society that preceded it. And yeah, with Titus Alone, it is that sense of, it's almost, I mean, in that sense, I mean, obviously it's not a reference point for him because it couldn't possibly have been, but it almost feels like, something like Guy Debord and the sort of spectacle sort of coming out. Like it is a series of set pieces, and those set pieces are always hyper representational, and there's often nothing behind what they're representing. It's just a sort of hall of mirrors almost.
Yes, yeah, and I think people find that very baffling, especially after, if they've read the first two Gormenghast books, because it is, although it is always packaged as the third in a trilogy, it is very much not. It is its own. Yeah. Right, it's its own standalone work in most respects. I mean, stylistically alone, it feels like the writing of a different writer.
I mean, it expresses, I think, a much deeper horror at the world as well. I think, like, there's a lot of horror in Gormenghast, obviously, but that's sort of blended with other things, whereas the horror of Titus Alone feels like it's unmitigated and
and unanchored. It doesn't have any mooring, whereas in Gormenghast there is the horror of Gormenghast is often very specific. There's a horror that's innate to Gormenghast itself in terms of its repressive, constrictive, prescriptive systems. There's the horror of Steerpike, but when in Titus Alone, it's the horror of losing control. It's the horror of nothing making sense, not even one's own memories or one's own mind or personality. Nothing is anchored in Titus Alone. It's hard to tell what is real and what isn't.
The horror is diffuse. Yeah, it's not specific anymore. There's not particular monsters or a particular sense of structures in play that are bad, and something can be played against them. I mean, I think there is still a sense right until the end of Gormenghast, and I think even in the sort of final actions of Gormenghast of Titus leaving, of hope. There's hope all the way through. I mean, I think in some respects, like in a sort of very perverse way, even Steerpike's project has sort of veins of perverse hope in it. It's not ever going to be realized, but he definitely hopes for things.
I think that in his own mind, up to a point anyway, up to a very particular point, Steerpike has a kind of idealism about him. I think he believes that he is going to set things right. Even when he's at his most vicious early on, the people to whom he is being absolutely repulsive and sadistic are, in his own mind, people who deserve it. They are, he's actually, with every petty cruelty that he inflicts on the Groans and their retainers, he's striking an almost revolutionary blow, but that stops at a very particular point. That I think it's when he's burned. It's after the burning, when he emerges from the waters and he's half scarred, and I think at that point something happens to his mind and to whatever idealist project he has, and it just becomes almost nihilistic. It doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters anymore.
And I think there's a sort of narcissism that drives him, and so that destruction of his ideal of himself is also in a way the destruction of his other ideas. I mean, I also think there's a thing I'm not often sort of drawn to Baudrillard. I think it is the French philosopher, but he did say something I quite like about sort of true evil being is seeing evil everywhere in the world, and I think I think that's sort of Steerpike down to a T. Like he's driven to become more and more monstrously evil because he just perceives everything as evil and rotten, and as unsalvageable. And when that encompasses himself, that's like the last.
That's it, isn't it?
Thing, yeah.
There's nothing else. So his only option at that point is either self-destruction or for that to turn outward, and that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, that's basically it. He's kind of almost. I think at that point he almost becomes a character more like the Joker or something. Like he is just. Yeah.
There is a sequence. I can't remember exactly where it is. I think it's right towards the end when the rains have fallen and he's half starving, and he doesn't know. He's almost there is almost like a lack of lucidity to him at that point. He's feverish. He's starving. He doesn't really know what he's doing. Where it describes him standing in the moonlight atop Gormenghast, and he has this fantasy of ripping open his own chest, and his heart is burning inside of him. And it is this incredibly nihilistic vision. There's almost like an avenging angel quality to it, or a fallen angel quality to it.
I think that's always there. I mean, there's a Luciferian dimension to Steerpike, to his sort of rebellion against Gormenghast,
and the way he operates as well. I mean, he is a tempter, isn't he? I mean, his whole seduction of Fuchsia can be read as Luciferian.
And even more, maybe the aunts.
Of course.
Sort of draws them in with promises of all the things they've been denied as these deeply resentful aristocrats. I mean, they're sort of. I particularly like them in the BBC.
Oh, they were so good, weren't they? Clarice and Cora were fantastic, just perfectly cast, and also perfectly played.
No, they were excellent, and they added sort of levity and pathos and exactly everything that was needed in every scene that they were in. They were excellent. Yeah, I mean that whole series.
I rewatched it recently for the purposes of a podcast, the Egoats podcast that I did with Dave Fagiani, and it was wonderful. It was a really wonderful experience going back to it. I mean, the way there's so much care taken to not just portraying the books, not just capturing the ethos of the books, but also something about Mervyn Peake himself. So a lot of the aesthetics that they incorporate into Gormenghast are from Mervyn Peake's own influences, like his artistic influences. It's very clever stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's the sense of the place is absolutely magic, and and I mean, I think they got from the beginning that the place is the most important character of the story.
Absolutely.
And it would have gone very badly had they not realized that. But then they keep that sort of Dickensian feel, the atmosphere.
That hyper reality thing that's going on as well, which is pervasive in the book. The book is so incredibly theatrical. The danger, if they did it now, this would definitely be the danger. They would try to make it too realist. They would try to add far too many dramatic elements that don't fit, instead of maintaining that strangeness, the quirkiness of the whole thing. The characters in Gormenghast do react in very odd and strange ways to one another and to the circumstances in which they find themselves. Their psychologies are odd. They're very, very peculiar and often very perverse. And the TV series just gets that. It just gets it.
I think especially if the BBC did it today, they would be overwhelmingly tempted in that bad direction.
I think so. Yeah. There would be so much pressure for them to make it very flashy and very slick, and also kind of po-faced in the wrong way.
Probably they wouldn't have the right, I think, humorous sensibilities and irreverence at points that the book has, and that the series that they have has. I think
it's hilarious. It is laugh out loud funny at times, and oddly funny as well, in the same way that the book is oddly funny. I mean, the John Sessions as Prune Squalor I mean, you could. He is straight out of the book. He is ripped directly out of the pages of the book, to the point whereby he's got Prune Squaller's physical mannerisms, the way he perches like a bird, the way he puffs out his belly a little bit. He's slightly pompous. The little titters that he has, which Mervyn Peake specifically describes within the book, that irritating laugh that he has. The interactions between Irma and Alfred Prune Squaller are magic. I will happily sit down on YouTube and just watch those two clips of those two for all day.
I mean, it's perfectly cast. Even the parts of the book that I'm less fond of, like the professorial stuff, is well done. I mean, it's apt to the book. It's completely in keeping, and they know how to time it as well. I mean, they're not sort of beholden to the book to a fault, so they pace it as a series in a very well done way as well.
They do, which is surprising. I mean, it's it is a unforgiving book to adapt.
Yeah. I mean, the temptation, of course, because there is so much background. There's so much sort of just. I mean, I wouldn't say it feels like exposition in the book, because it sort of feeds into the atmosphere, but there's the weight of history and how much there's characters that will drone on about it. And incorporating that into a series is a real nightmare.
Very difficult. Yeah. What do you choose to cut? That's the trick, isn't it? What do you choose to cut? One of the biggest, the best decisions that they make is changing the beginning, so it doesn't start with Rotcod up in the Hall of Bright Carvings, because how would that even work in a television series? You couldn't do it, could you?
It's so perfect for the book, and it's such an interesting openings. And it just doesn't translate to the screen at all. You would lose everything that makes it special immediately.
Right. I mean, all you've really got when you translate it visually is a guy in a hall not doing very much.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it.
The main thing I think you lose from the book in the series is the inner monologues of Steerpike.
Right.
This sense of, I mean, I think you get it partly because it's so well played. The whole part is played. You get the sense from I can't remember the actor.
John Rhys Meyers, I believe.
Yeah, and his expressions and mannerisms. There's a kind of he almost feels like a Shakespearean villain in the way that he's almost kind of intimate with the camera. Like there's a sense that he kind of knows you're there, almost there's no strict fourth wall breaking, but there's almost this sense that he's aware of an audience and he's playing as a villain.
Which works really well for Steerpike, actually. Yes. It really does, because he is the one who knows what's going on. He is the one who sees the artifice and the contrivance for what it is.
Yeah, and so like having that like slight suggestion of fourth wall breaking where it's not quite there, but it's suggested, you've got this sort of layered seeing beyond the veil kind of thing.
It works. It works beautifully. I mean, my favorite character, certainly in the book and in the TV show, rewatching it, was Fuchsia. Just such a beautiful character. Full of ambiguities. Just absolutely informed by her ambiguities, and she is the one I identify with the most.
She's a sort of Cassandra figure. I mean, she's a sort of tragic prophetess kind of person who kind of sees it all coming, in a way, or I think sees the dilapidation. But
gets it on like an emotional level more than anything. That's why Steerpike finds her so problematic, and why ultimately he fails. He just cannot get a bead on her, because she is the antithesis of everything he represents. Steerpike is essentially a clockwork man. There is no emotion at all beyond. There's almost like a Patrick Bateman quality to him. There is nothing but disgust and hatred in Steerpike.
And I think because she embodies the thing he really can't have, ever really. She's the one character who seduces him in a way. Like he's like his whole thing. I mean, even in that way that he sort of is aware of being with an audience, and I think there's a sense that he's almost trying to make the audience complicit. Like there's a sense, even reading the book and as well as the television series, that he wants you to be complicit in his crimes. And that kind of works. Like there are parts where it's sort of against your better nature, you find yourself going along with Steer Pike.
Definitely. You almost, I mean, it's very pronounced in the TV series in the final quarters. You kind of are with him. You want him to get away.
I mean, partly because of the vileness of what he's up against, but you definitely are looking past his own evil and his own internal issues. But with her, she's never really seduced by him as much as he tries to delude himself, I think. I mean, I think there's a sense of affection, but she has that freely with almost anybody she encounters in the show. She's never really taken in by his ideological vision, by his promises, by those things. At least I don't think so. I mean, he's definitely betrays her. There's no doubt of that. But I think that's separate to him persuading her of anything.
I think what the book describes is that he just underestimates her in his own peculiar way. He cannot imagine a creature like her, which is so full of ambiguities. He actually lacks the faculty for all of his brilliance, and he is brilliant. He's brilliant in a way nobody else in Gormenghast is. He cannot imagine a creature like her, and what he certainly can't imagine is that the flowering of womanhood, I suppose, that he inspires in her will actually create a creature that is in certain respects his equal.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think like the only character in the show that's sort of brilliant in the way that he's brilliant is the Queen.
Gertrude, of course.
Who he also, I think, underestimates, at least at the beginning. I think towards the end he realizes just how much he's downplayed his real enemy.
Well, in the book, it describes that he almost everyone in Gormenghast that he encounters, he knows them immediately, or he assumes he knows them immediately, and he knows exactly how to present himself, what to say. He avoids the Countess because he doesn't. She's glacial to him, and he doesn't understand what she perceives or how he can get a bead on her.
I mean, I think the thing with both Gertrude and Fusha is because Gertrude kind of already has what he wants and already has what she wants, and Fusha wants totally different things that exist in a totally different universe to the one he occupies. He doesn't really have the mechanisms of temptation that he has with almost anybody else.
Right.
He's a kind of Mephistophelian character, but without anything to offer.
Right, without the supernatural powers that are required. Certainly for Fusha, because Fuchsia's very like Titus in many respects. She doesn't want the world that she's born to. She operates in her own imagination outside the strictures of that world. And Steerpike, just beyond a very sort of childish, almost nursery, in a sort of nursery manner, he can't give her what she wants. Nobody can. Yeah.
And I think he isn't so bothered by Titus, because what Titus wants is something, although Steerpike disdains it, that sort of like easy life, I guess.
Yeah.
Titus wants just to be free of it all.
Yeah.
And that's kind of everything that Steerpike has rejected for himself, just going along.
Of course. Well, I think there's I don't know whether it's in the book. I don't think it is actually, but it is in the TV series, where he says of Titus, he's too wrapped up in himself to even appreciate what's given to him.
Which is ironic for Steerpike to accuse somebody of narcissism.
Right.
But it's not entirely wrong. I mean, he is sort of deeply self-involved. Titus.
Titus Titus is like there are points where Titus is effectively an abyss of self-interest, where he just becomes completely impotent because he wallows in this incredible self-pity.
I mean, he's a sort of Hamlet figure in that way. Like, he is this kind of extreme introspectively like a self-involved person, and therefore he's paralyzed by it. Like he spends most of his time not being able to do anything, and even in the final moments, he's barely able to act.
Right. I mean, it's not skill that allows him to defeat Steerpike. It's accident.
Yes.
He was lucky. That's it. I mean, those are Steerpike's last words to him. You were lucky.
He benefited from the connections that he had and the friendships that he had in crucial ways, and that's, you know, I mean, I think the thing that Steerpike most resented, you know, what he could have done with those connections.
That's it. I mean, he even says to Gertrude at one point, when just before he actually uses his catapult to fire a rock at her, he says, "From one who should have been your son." That's the point, isn't it? You know.
I mean, you know, other than her commitment to the ideology, I doubt she would disagree.
Right. I mean, she would certainly have preferred someone like Steerpike.
Yeah. I think that would have been absolutely ideal for her if her son had been Steerpike and the kitchen boy had been like her son.
Titus, right?
Yeah, that would have been absolutely perfect for her. And probably not for anybody else.
No, almost certainly not. But maybe so. I mean, maybe for Gormenghast itself, maybe that's what it would have required. You know.
I mean, I think like the implication is Gormenghast is unsalvageable, and I think in that sense, as much as the sort of Titus Alone is a strange novel, the just total disappearing of Gormenghast.
Right, from everything. It's the only place Gormenghast exists is in Titus's mind. It's in Titus's memory. No one else knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. And it's a sense that life, it's not just like a lost history. There's a sense in which that life world no longer has a basis in reality anymore.
Right. It's winked out of existence because Titus isn't there anymore.
And they have, you know, bits of it that they recover from Titus, and they regard it as farce, like I mean, cruelly like farce in the case of that. But there's that sense of, you know, I guess that sort of sense of like the past is a different country. There's a sense of the sort of culturally alien about that other world that they regard as actually silly. And it's that's one of the more horrific points, actually, I think, in the Titus Alone. That's
absolutely it's the. It's everything Titus is, isn't it? I mean, he strives to be something else, but realizes that actually he is Gormenghast through and through. But Gormenghast doesn't
escape. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I say he's trying to escape by just physically leaving without accounting for the sort of the roots of himself in that world. Yeah.
And finds himself fraying apart as a result. There's nothing to contain him anymore. There's nothing to actually define who or what he is. And so in Titus Alone, he just bounces around from circumstance to circumstance, a lot of which are really farcical. They're almost slapstick, a lot of them. He finds himself like falling through skylights into grand parties and falling on literally on top of women who are dancing and all of that stuff. And just without any kind of direction or sense of who he is or where he's going. And of course, at the very end, he rejects Gormenghast as well.
I mean, I compared it to Kafka, but another interesting comparison in that sense of it just being a series of increasingly irreal set pieces is it's almost like Alice in Wonderland. There's almost this, it's just a tumbling from one bizarre scenario. And it's like these scenarios are trying to teach him something, but even as the audience, there's no sense of what they're trying to teach him.
None whatsoever. I mean, he has these incredible encounters where he has love affairs which seem to last for a long time, some maybe months, maybe even years, and then just arbitrarily abandons them. He falls in with bands of thieves and whatnot, and does jobs with them, and does it for a long time, and then abandons that as well. It's because there is no anchorage for him. There is nothing that fulfills him.
I mean, I think it's almost worse than that because there's almost no anchorage in that world anymore.
Yeah,
like that there's it's a world that's ill suited to him, but it's also a kind of world that's ill suited to probably everybody.
Yeah, to itself.
and it's kind of I guess it's the impasse because there's a sort of suggestions of these new contradictions that are arising out of modernity without any way past them, I guess. And I guess that's expressed in former than peak in the horror of what happened in Nazi Germany and his experiences related to that. And I think that plays a huge influential part on that book, and I think the horror that suffuses it.
Definitely. I mean, funnily enough, the notion of someone out of place in the world to which they're born, who doesn't want the world that they're born to, kind of feeds into one of the other stories we're going to be discussing this evening, of course.
Yes, Celephais, I think it is.
Celephais, or I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I've been pronouncing it Celephais myself.
I think Celephais sounds right, and it's that would certainly do. If someone wants to correct us, they're welcome.
Please go ahead. I mean, there's probably going to be a few actually, because there's a lot of Lovecraft in this story, very much making up his own very almost Tolkien-esque world. With its own strange names for people and places. He even, I say he, and what I'm doing there is almost unconsciously conflating Lovecraft with the narrator, because it kind of is Lovecraft, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there is other stuff going on there. It's definitely a version of Lovecraft. He's got this, because he's this sort of fallen aristocrat.
Right.
I immediately thought of the sort of Marx quote about the lumpen proletariat as the refuse of all classes in encountering this character, because that's exactly what Cranes, as he calls himself, although that's
what he even creates his own fiction, like imaginary avatar, to the point whereby he creates his own name.
Yes,
he's the protagonist in this story, the one who is telling the story to the reader, is so out of love with the world to which he is born. He's expressing such a profound dissatisfaction with the physical realities into which he's born that he recreates not only himself but it as well.
Yeah. It's a story of, I guess, the impossibility of escapism. Like that's the sort of central tension that runs through the whole thing.
But there's also a romanticism to it, isn't there? I mean, I think people who come to this story and find it in, say, Lovecraft collections are probably really surprised by it.
It's certainly not a traditional horror story, even by Lovecraft standards.
Nope.
I think there's only really the bit at the end that could be classed as horror.
Right. I think that's the point where Lovecraft kind of drags it back. He can't allow himself to run with the flight of fancy that is Celephais itself, this fantastical kingdom that this man is the imaginer and author of which he is the god. He can't allow that. There is something within Lovecraft, his cynicism, his depression, his despair, that just will not allow for that. So he has to drag it back.
There's a lot of authorial tensions. I mean, he actually keeps dragging it back in a way, because he comes back to this in the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadaf.
Of course.
When you meet the character there, when you meet Cranes there, he's still there. He's still leading this. He's still the god of this reality, but he's dissatisfied. It no longer really fulfills his yearnings, and like Lovecraft, I think, is because he does kind of start, as he often does. I think we've discussed this in relation to other stories, with these kind of manifestos. He starts stories often with these manifesto style, almost like non-fiction essay writing about stories. And like this one starts in this very sort of Oscar Wildean vein about the nature of art being to sort of beautify the world. Like the point of art is beauty. And then the ending obviously completely rebuffs that.
Rebuffs that, and almost inverts it completely. Like the character that it describes at the very end, and it comes really quickly. It's very abrupt, isn't it? The ending is so abrupt, and changes tone and timbre so completely that it does have this whiplash quality about it. You almost get the impression that whilst Lovecraft was writing, he had this spurt of nihilism and despair. It's almost like his brain wouldn't allow him, like the disease in his mind just wouldn't allow him this moment of pure metaphysics where he's expressing something kind of beautiful in a way. It's a despairing yearning for another condition, for another state of being, which all of us feel, all of us conscious entities that are able to imagine better feel. Ultimately, it won't allow him to have it, so he's got to make it a point of nihilism.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, you can see it percolating. I mean, I guess from the moment that he turns to drugs to access the inner world, there's this sense of it percolating that there's something that's going to go very wrong, and then when he loses all of his stuff and he encounters the knights, that sort of incredibly, well, actually, truly Quixote-esque, quixotic moment. I mean, Quixote in the sense that like, as with Quixote as well, like Quixote is exactly this, a dreamer who suffers in reality for maintaining this fantasy of a better, more beautiful world. And I think, as with Quixote, and I think Cervantes has this deep ambivalence all the way through, like is this sense of like, would we be truly mad is to not see the world as it could be?
Yeah.
And I think that's there in Lovecraft. It's there in quite a few stories.
It really is. Even when he's trying desperately to describe something else. I mean, it's part of the delicious irony, the unconscious irony in most of Lovecraft. He is trying to make the reader feel horror and despair and nihilism at this universe that doesn't care about you and is full of horrors and hideousness. And yet the relish of the description and the elaboration of it shows that he actually really does enjoy the subject matter, and as a result his readers enjoy that subject matter. It's part of the tension, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the world of Celephais is kind of it's quite good, actually. I'm as you know, I'm a reader of utopias, and this isn't quite that. It's more like the sort of proto-utopias. It's more like there's a sort of medieval story of the island of Cocaine, where it was sort of this land of plenty that's kind of a really old folk story that poorer people sort of would tell each other about this land of infinite plenty, where like birds would throw themselves on the fire in front of you and you could eat in lakes made out of honey and that kind of thing, just infinite plenty. And there's some versions of it that are quite licentious and go some of those directions, and there's other myths like that. There's an old song from the United States called Big Rock Candy Mountain, which is very similar. I don't know if you've seen the Charlie the Unicorn online cartoon series. It's sort of one of those parody series, but they have this really bizarre reference to the Big Rock Candy Mountain. And I think the very first episode where Charlie is tricked to go there in typical fashion, and I think has parts of his internal organs stolen by the...
Tends to happen in the Charlie the Unicorn cartoons, doesn't it?
But it was just this really weird reference to something that you don't often encounter. But Celephais is exactly that. It's the Big Rock Candy Mountain. It's the island of Cocaine. What's interesting about that is it's not typical of that genre, because the things that he's granted there are not like, they're not sort of the baser urges things that people get at the Big Rock Candy Mountain or the Island of Cain.
They're not visceral, are they? They're not what Lovecraft would, I suppose, consider base. They're aesthetic. It's architecture, it's atmosphere, it's culture.
Yeah, there's obsessive amount of architecture that is more common to sort of the more utopian writers. There's a lot of like detail on the architecture.
Right. I mean, this is what surprised me about the story more than anything. It's the fact that, I mean, utopianism is not something that, it's not a happy bedfellow with H.P. Lovecraft, and yet this story demonstrates a capacity for that vision.
Yeah, I mean, it comes up every now and again. Like I think I've talked before about how there's a part of the Mountains of Madness where glimpses an alien society. I think it's unfortunately described as National Socialist, although what that actually means in this context is really kind of vague. And by all accounts, Lovecraft's grasp of Nazi ideology was never very firm either. But he describes this society of that's a harmonious alien society that these monsters come from.
Right.
That is kind of oddly utopian. That's certainly in I would say the author's framing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, with Celephais, there's not very much sense. I mean, what's interesting about that is you get a glimpse of social details. So there's stuff about the institutions the aliens use, which is very rare for Lovecraft.
Mm-hmm.
Here, there's not really a sense that any of that goes on because these are almost timeless, impervious beings. They don't really need institutions.
Right, they don't need institutions. Yeah, it's very odd, isn't it, for someone who of Lovecraft's bent, when you read his political perspectives and his general reverence for all kinds of institutions and establishments, to imagine the society that's shorn of them.
It's basically a society of gods. It's a kind of
there's an Olympian element to it, isn't there? There is almost like I did certainly imagine Celephais to look a little bit like a city of the gods, a little bit maybe like Athens at its height, at its very height.
I think that's definitely that's quite easy to sort of see in it. And I mean the other stuff. I mean, it goes some very strange places as you'd expect with Lovecraft, but obviously not so much in the horror direction. I mean, the whole image of the ship sort of sailing into the sky at the horizon point,
right?
It's a really strange one. I wonder if he took it from somewhere else, but it's a
very beautiful thing, isn't it? It is a very beautiful thing that he's created, and that again, I mean, there is beauty in Lovecraft, but it tends to be in terms of the elaboration of monstrosity or atrocity, doesn't it? This is not that. This is more akin to what you find described in Tolkien or C.S. Lewis. It's a fantastical vision.
Yeah, it's definitely more on the fantasy side of things than the horror side of things. And that whole sequence is sort of marked by these moments of poetic, whimsical, very fairy tale beauty. Like it is, I mean, there was obviously a lot of fairy tale reading in Lovecraft's background, and this is certainly not the only instance in which Lovecraft does this. The other dream cycle stuff,
of course,
has that. And he especially did it towards the sort of beginnings of his writing career more than towards the end. I think he lost that.
Yeah, I think as the despair and depression set in, he lost the capacity to imagine the better stuff, the more sincere stuff. Ironically, I mean, one of the other things that's very notable about this story is it's almost entirely shorn of his ideologies.
Yeah, there's not. Quite unlike the other story we'll be talking about.
They could be like antipodean to one another. They could be antitheses to one another.
They are really strikingly distant, although they were written at a very sort of proximate period, sort of
right. So
it's
the sides of Lovecraft's personality. It's the facets of his psyche coming out.
Yeah, there's not a case of, because you do have stories of his that contradict quite wildly, but often from very different periods, whereas these ones, I think, being of the same period, couldn't really contradict each other more. Like,
right,
even the same style.
They don't even feel like the same writer.
Yeah, if you were given these two stories and asked if you thought it was the same writer and you were going in completely blind, there's very little chance you would guess that it was.
Right. I mean, that's another thing about Celephais. All of the stuff that Lovecraft is associated with in terms of his prose and his technicalities, it just isn't here.
No, it's much more in the picture in the house, but although they're in a slightly subdued form compared to sort of his later extravagances.
Yeah, definitely.
But in Celephais, it doesn't exist at all. This is, I gather from reading S.T. Joshi's stuff that there is a, unsurprisingly, because that was generally the case for the early stories, there was a Lord Dunsay influence. So there's a Lord Dunsay parallel story, which is much darker, much more consistently darker. I think I've got it written down here. The Coronation of Mr. Thomas Sharp, which is a very Lord Dunsay
that's a very
title.
it is, isn't it? Isn't it just?
And in that, it's a very similar setup with a character who's escaping to this dreamlike state. I think there's more of a sense of magic in it. I mean, I think Celephais is kind of very ambiguous to what extent anything actually is happening outside of his head. I guess that the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadaf establishes that, at least within that story's universe, there is something going on outside of his head.
It's peculiar, isn't it? Because it seems to be what I draw from it is that it's neither one nor the other.
Yeah.
It's simultaneously a matter of imagination, and it's also a place. It is actually a dimension.
And it's kind of unimportant, really. It's not really
right.
Stories that interesting. But I think with Lord Dunsay, it is more important, and it is definitely real. And he ends up in a mental asylum, which is a much more...
Of course he does.
Yeah. I mean, you could say it's hackneyed, but in a way, Lord Dunsay, he's kind of establishing these things as hackneyed when he's creating the cliches. So
yeah, it's fair enough, isn't it? But it does happen a lot, both in Lovecraft and in Lord Dunsany.
Yeah, it's a trope. I mean, I think it happens. Does it happen in Poe at all? I mean, I know.
Characters who end up in insane asylums in Poe.
Sure, actually, I might be just imagining it does because of how much it happens in.
There are characters that lose their minds in Poe, but I'm struggling to think of one that actually ends up institutionalized, per se.
But it's a very common thing in Lovecraft, and I think
isn't it just? I mean, in Lovecraft, what tends to happen is they're written from the perspective of the subject as they are slowly losing their minds within their insane asylum cell, and they're writing down what's happening to them. Oh, it's on the stairs. I see a face at the window. Stop writing, you fool, and run. Or
I really wish someone had told Lovecraft that he doesn't have to justify the narrational perspective, because this is such a consistent, I
mean, he even does it here, doesn't he? He has to justify why this is happening. He can't just let it go. And yet there is this, I find in this story, this incredible yearning where he does seem to want to let it go. He wants this flight of fancy to hold itself.
I mean, I think there's almost a suggestion with the ending that, as brutal and as dark as it is, he's still kind of invested in Corinne's thing, and it's like, well, okay, so what? He was already kind of going out on the streets. He knew it was over for him in the real world,
right?
And there's a sense that there's nothing really. I mean, because he really ends on this quite squalid image, he really doubles down on that sense of, no, the world is ugly, there's nothing good here.
That's the core of the metaphysics of this story, isn't it? It's something that bizarrely C.S. Lewis gets at a couple of times. In The Silver Chair, there is a sequence towards the end where the main characters have been driven into this underground kingdom, which is ruled over by a witch who is of the same family as the White Witch from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and she rules over this species of, they're called under-earth men, imaginatively, and she tries to convince the characters that there never was a world above the ground. There is no sky, there is no sun, it's all a dream, it's all a make-believe fantasy. And one of the characters, Puddleglum, the Marshwiggle, massively, brilliantly played in the BBC adaptation by Tom Baker, says to her, well, if that's the case, madam, if this black pit of a world is the best you can do, then our imaginary one can lick it hollow. It's the same metaphysics, isn't it? It's the same concept. It's the fact, and for all the problems I have with Lewis and with Lovecraft in terms of both their politics and their metaphysics, there is sometimes I find this sincerity breaks through, this yearning breaks through all of the bile and the bilge and the filth of the ideologies they adopt, where what they're expressing is something fundamentally human. It's this: we are creatures we are matter that has evolved whereby we can imagine better. We can imagine more for ourselves, and what they're expressing is the horror of that, but also the potential of that profound yearning for something better. I
mean, it's the precondition of tragedy and pathos, and that's that's what Lovecraft is essentially interested in. And I think at his better moments, that's definitely what C.S. Lewis is more interested in.
Definitely. And you get it. It does come through. And I identify with that. That is something I really like about these writers, because I think it's honest. I think it's sincere, and I think it's beautiful, even when it's dark. And as you say at the end of Celephais, it's a squalid image. It really is. But it's kind of drawing a line under it, isn't it? It's saying, you know what? Who cares?
Yeah,
it's not even worth commenting upon, really, because the Celephais, the imaginary world that this guy has created, is so much better.
But he really does go to town on just like the last line, where a notably fat and especially offensive millionaire brewer enjoys the purchased atmosphere of extinct nobility.
Right. It's vicious, isn't it? It's totally vicious.
Yeah, that's almost where like Lovecraft. I mean, you said sort of it's kind of Lovecraft's nihilism taking over, and yeah, you do get like there's no sense of anger in this story until that moment.
Yeah,
even when horrific things are happening to Koreans, he's not judging anybody. He's not resentful. No. Like he's lost everything, but there's no resentment. Until
the end.
That line.
But the end is vicious. It's totally unpleasant, squalid, dark, but describing something very true and very real. I mean, for Lovecraft himself, of course, I mean, even though he wasn't really, he did always have this air of defeated nobility about him, didn't he? This sense that in a better world, someone like him would have been more appreciated.
I think that's sort of like it. For kind of that reactionary predisposition, it's kind of an almost inevitable stance to take, that kind of because I mean, of course, the contradiction that the nostalgic of that kind of reactionary he always has is that the past isn't actually much more welcoming to them than the present,
of course,
or the future, and so they have to imagine themselves as the kind of person that would fit into the past in order to, and which is why, I mean, Cranes is obviously an avatar, but
it's paper thin, isn't it? It's paper thin. I mean, he has nothing that Lovecraft doesn't have in his personality. He is so close to Lovecraft, it's unbelievable. This is one of the most autobiographical works, I think.
And he has to but he also has to do away with that idealized sense of self before he can become vicious in the story. Like it's only after Cranes is kind of off in his fantasy world and simultaneously dead, that he can suddenly become more resentful and angry and sort of cast bile on the world.
It's almost like
millionaires.
It is almost like this part of me doesn't belong there. Celephais isn't the place for that. So we need to wait for that for it to have passed on. Then we can focus here in the squalid, hideous nonsense of reality. That's where we can spill our bile.
But he's never willing to spare the audience that like there's a part of him that's too good for it, but not the reader.
No, definitely not.
And it's an I mean, there's a lot of Lovecraft, I think, is a guy who thinks that he hides himself much better than he does. Generally.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true. I always find he's so desperate to control the experience of not just the writing but the reading as well, and that often is to his detriment. He's trying to preempt the audience all the time and trying to control their reaction to what he's writing by it's the classic stuff where he's using like a million adjectives where one or none will do. And it often it results, of course, in the exact opposite of what he's trying to attempt.
Well, I think that if he,
sorry, go on.
If he can dilute everything into like a sort of single, sort of all-encompassing description that's at the same time elliptical and all-encompassing, that he kind of just nails people to a particular interpretation. I think there's a real sense that he fears the interpretative power of his audience.
Oh yeah, I think so massively. I think he would, like, for example, he would be horrified to know that there are comedic adaptations of his work, like Reanimator, for example. I think he would spin so fast in his grave there'd be nothing but a nub of bone left rotating.
That's definitely true. I mean, he doesn't. there's very little humor in Lovecraft. Where there is, it's mostly this kind of sneering, nasty.
It's bitter. It's really bitter, or it's gallows. It's like it's vile irony, isn't it? Usually.
Yeah. There's not a lot of like. There's certainly not a lot of undermining himself. Like that's the one thing. I mean, he does that, of course, excessively when he's talking about his own work. When he's speaking in his own voice, he's constantly and maybe anything but derogatory about.
I always say to like any of my fellow writers out there who are having difficulty with they're feeling bad about their own place or about their own work, go and read what Lovecraft wrote about his own work.
Yeah, I think it would be a very rare writer to have harsher things to say about themselves than Lovecraft.
Yeah, he was never satisfied, was he? He was never satisfied. Even with the stuff he actually got published that was submitted, he wasn't happy.
No, it never hit his standards, and he always felt inferior to Lord Dunsay and Poe especially. You know, he could be pretty vicious to them as well. He's pretty vicious even to his idols.
Oh yeah.
I mean, something that amused me, sort of reading notes in the book I had with the picture in the house, is that so there's the book. We won't get into the plot yet, but there's the book that's sort of pivotal to the picture in the house, the Regnum Congo.
Yes,
and it's a real book.
Right, is it? It's okay,
but it's not the book that Lovecraft subscribes, unsurprisingly.
What a surprise.
But S.T. Joshi, who certainly could kind of land a couple of blows against Lovecraft sometimes, sort of calls him out for this because Lovecraft was apparently very derogatory about Edgar Allan Poe, including literature in his stories that was real literature, and then getting something wrong about it. Considering the Regnum Congo is basically a completely different book to the one Lovecraft has in this. I thought that was quite amusing.
That is amusing. I mean, this whole story, I've got to admit, I did find amusing because it's the complete antithesis to Celephais. It's much more classically Lovecraft, isn't it? It's got all the elements you'd expect of Lovecraft. You know, it's got a guy who's a scholar who's he goes to Miskatonic, and he's actually heading there, isn't he? At the beginning, he's heading to Miskatonic. Or is he's out in? Is it like some sort of scholarly trip or something to that effect?
Yeah, I think he's going to the. Yeah, I think it is. It's everything is based on, because he's a genealogist.
That's it, yeah.
Which is, of course, not accidental at all to the story.
No.
And yeah, he's sort of I mean, it begins. I mean, we could go on to that one because I think we said quite a lot about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, it begins again with another one of these essays, and I think this is a formative period for Lovecraft. These stories are both formative. This is the kind of beginning of the New England stories.
Yeah, of course.
Sort of the beginning of the dream cycle stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he has, just like in Celephais, he has another sort of opening manifesto. And again, like Celephais, he contradicts it, I think. Although I think a bit more subtly than he does in Celephais. Because the opening manifesto is this kind of... It reminds me a lot... I can't remember which one it is. I'm sure Jack Graham and Kit Powers could fill us in on this one if they're listening and want to add it to the comments, because they know these stories quite well, I imagine, of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Sherlock Holmes is describing how rural places are especially vile. Like, if you think the crime of the cities is bad, you should sort of see the sort of inner dwellings of the country, etc. Lovecraft does that in the opening of this, describing these hovels in New England and the depths of horror to be found there.
Yeah, there's an almost sense of like the American wilderness, isn't there? It's the same kind of horror that you find in like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or The Hills Have Eyes, isn't it?
I said in a note, this feels very much like a kind of early version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Right. Yeah.
beats.
The beats are the same, aren't they? The beats are
Yeah.
oddly the same. It's like a slightly more maybe like American Gothic version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, it's more poetic. It's more drawn out and heavily even overplotted, I think, in parts. But
Yeah, because it's a very simple idea, isn't it? I mean, when you break it down to the bare bones of the story, there's not an enormous amount there.
yeah, it's basically just an encounter. That's
It's an
the whole
encounter. That is it. But it's actually it's very well written. It is very well written, and yet I know we said earlier that there isn't humor in Lovecraft, but actually the tension in this story is quite amusing.
There is some, like, almost as soon as he encounters the guy, and after seeing that picture, you kind of already anticipate what's going to happen.
The moment he comes upon one of these huts and hovels, I mean, he takes a great deal of time explaining at the beginning how even the huts and the hovels themselves are kind of evil. There's something like preternaturally evil about the way they're constructed. The huts and the houses in the woods and that lean against the rocks, these rural constructions stare back at you.
Yeah. The second he walks in, like he says, I think the second he walks in is like something in the whole atmosphere seemed redolent of the unhallowed aged, of unpleasant crudeness, and of secrets which should be forgotten.
Right.
Which, yeah.
It's wonder what's going to happen here.
It's not nuanced foreshadowing, to put it.
Not really, is it? It's not really, no. I mean, what I love, though, and I did get a right old chuckle out of it, I've got to say, when he's having the dialogue with the quite frankly quite brilliantly drawn gentleman who owns the hut. He's really distinct, isn't he? I mean, you get such a clear picture of the way this guy looks. It's very, very well drawn, and the way he talks as well. I mean, he's got a very, very distinct voice for Lovecraft. You actually don't find that very often either, really.
There's been a lot of speculation about where he got the sort of the phonetic spellings for. Yeah, I mean, he's got this like thick Yankee accent, I think is how it's described and it is very idiosyncratic in particular. And his whole mannerisms, like he's got this kind of larger than life affability coupled with the horror.
Yeah, and it's like what I love is like the horror is just like he doesn't even do anything. He doesn't do anything that terrible. He's just he is genuinely happy to have company. For one thing, he's genuinely he's quite accommodating. He's courteous. It's just the way he intersperses it, the way it becomes like a confessional as the conversation goes on, and the reactions of this slightly buttoned down scholar from Miskatonic. It's hilarious. I mean, I'm sure Lovecraft would have hated to have it described that way. He would have absolutely hated it. But there is a comedy there, isn't there? Surely.
Absolutely. I mean, the tension is funny, like it's just there.
Right.
Yeah.
The interspersions as well, the way the guy, they're looking at these frankly, I mean, really quite repulsive images from the book. And the guy is almost, I mean, Lovecraft never strays into the sexual. That's really it's not his area. But there is a visceral base element to it, isn't there? The way he responds to these images. This is about as close as Lovecraft gets to it at all.
There's a lot going on in this character for a Lovecraft monster, which is essentially what he is.
Yeah.
Because usually, I mean, most of his monsters, of course, are inexplicable.
Right.
But here, there's actually quite a lot that's really obviously apparent, like the fact that he's both desperate for this genealogist to enjoy this stuff as he's enjoying.
Yes.
And also this like slight concern that he might be going too far.
Yeah, he is conscious of the fact, isn't he, that he may be disturbing, which is why he preempts everything he says. It's like don't be afraid. Don't take this the wrong way. I am not I am not a monster. Yeah. That's essentially what he's saying, isn't it? I am not a monster. Look, I am not going to hurt you, okay? I just feel a need to unburden myself. There is a confessional element, or at least a conspiratorial element here. Yeah,
and that sort of becomes sort of encapsulated in that the phrase that he repeats, "the more the same" thing, which is just I love that turn of phrase. That was just like it's like it's so badly put, and at the same time just perfectly encapsulates everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's very rare I get a chuckle out of Lovecraft. I've got to say, it's very rare. But reading the story this time round, yeah, I got a little bit of a chuckle out of this, and it's the stiffness of the scholar as well. Like, he should be gone, really, shouldn't he? The moment he has those tingles at the back of his neck, the hackles going up, it's like, yeah, get out. Just go. It doesn't matter if it's raining, run.
He doesn't have any survivor sense at all, and in any traditional horror, he definitely wouldn't survive. And I think he only basically does survive because he has to tell the story. Like, I don't actually think Lovecraft really wants him to survive. I don't think there's any sense that Lovecraft is trying to preserve this guy. He's just he's the one that he's the narrator,
right? So he has to survive because it's kind of epistemological, isn't it? You know, it's like a lot of Lovecraft stuff. So he kind of has to survive. And also, I mean, you get that very classic Lovecraft thing of the blood dripping down from the ceiling. So there's something awful upstairs where the guy was when he entered the house.
I mean, presumably the last guest.
Right. Yes, that's what I'd assume. It's like the remains of whoever else stumbled in there or was taken by the guy. And also the confessions of cannibalism, where he's trying to justify it, where he's saying, well, I read somewhere that it strengthens you meat that's alike. It strengthens you somehow, or it's more nutritious somehow. It is The Hills Have Eyes. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's The Hills Have Eyes. It's all those same concerns that like America has of itself, the USA has of itself, that of its empty spaces, its forgotten spaces, and the forgotten people who inhabit it, like the marginalized people who inhabit it.
And Resident Evil 7 also. I think it's 7.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
He kind of feels a lot like the corrupted father from Resident Evil 7.
Yeah, doesn't he just? I mean, I never thought about it, but yeah, very much so.
That same sort of sense of affability there, that's slightly sinister, and slightly trying to involve the protagonist.
Yeah, that's the fun of it, isn't it? That's the fun I get from this. It's the attempt to unveil both the protagonist and the reader into this world, and you get the impression. I mean, Lovecraft was a very stuffy man, wasn't he? He was a very proper man, and yet there is this prurience here, is there not? There is this sense that Lovecraft's kind of enjoying it too, and maybe pulls back a little bit.
I don't think you could write a character who's enjoying it at that level convincingly if you weren't also in some level capable of imagining that, and he clearly is.
But you've got to have in Lovecraft, because that is the way Lovecraft is, you've got to have the moral the overseer, the one who is presenting the disgust and the revulsion and the horror, and that is the scholar, of course, to keep it in check.
And even that isn't very convincing. Like, the scholar, I mean, he does that, but he's immediately struck and impressed by this guy.
Yeah.
He's very taken in by him, at least on first encountering.
Yeah.
And even as he sort of he realizes he can't. Well, he's not illiterate, of course. He can't read Latin, but as far as the scholar is concerned, that may as well be illiterate.
Right.
And yeah, but even that, he doesn't scorn him. He just kind of has this. Oh, that's cute kind of.
Yeah, and he kind of helps him, doesn't he? Like he reads out a passage for him for the man's pleasure, which is oddly sweet in a Lovecraft story. There's a Dickensian quality to the interaction, isn't there? It kind of reminds me of the interactions between characters in the old Curiosity Shop or something to that effect.
And that becomes rare in Lovecraft. Characters don't. I mean, often I think, especially in the later pieces, characters just interact less and less.
I think, to be honest, character becomes almost redundant in Lovecraft at some point. There comes a point where he doesn't really write characters. Certainly not protagonists. Like the protagonists just become vessels. You know, they are there to be the vessel that carries the reader along, and that's it. That is it. They don't have voices. They don't. Most characters in most of Lovecraft don't have their own distinct voice at all.
No, absolutely. This is still, he's kind of still testing out where his interests lie, I guess. And and I guess he just kind of gives up on this kind of writing as well. I mean, it does feel like it's a strain in parts. And also, I mean, I always feel like the ending of this one, which is probably the least good thing about it, the very sort of culmination of, I mean, it's odd with
it's slightly contrived, and it feels a bit too, it feels too theatrical, doesn't it? It's like the kind of thing you would imagine happen on a very grandiose stage play. In fact, it would probably make a very good stage play, like a small one, a short one, but it would actually work rather well as a stage play because the dialogue is very theatrical too. But that dripping onto the page is so contrived.
Yeah, I mean, the blood dripping is contrived, but I think the lightning bolt and the
lightning bolt that destroys the house. It's like, oh, for God's sake! Yeah, it is the Deus Ex Machina of that is ridiculous, isn't it?
And it destroys the house, but leaves the narrator
alive.
Leaves
the narrator alive. It's like, I mean, what are we to take from that? What are we to take from that?
He closes his eyes and he opens it after the thunderbolt, and everything else is just a smoldering wreck.
Right. Or what? Does he like crawl from the wreckage or what?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen things like that done for laughs directly. I mean, there's at the end of Marquis de Sade's Justine, she's killed by lightning, just to really ram home the point that even God is against it.
Yeah.
Which is a very like typical Marquis de Sade move, and she's struck by lightning, and in a particular way that I won't go into, but
it's the Marquis de Sade, isn't it? So,
yes, but like it feels like that, but without the humor. It feels like God's done with this, you know. It's
right. I mean, but there's nothing in the story that really warrants it, is there? It's so sedate. The rest of the story, it's very unusually for Lovecraft. It's very mundane. It's mundane horror, isn't it?
It would be stronger without it. I mean, it would have been stronger if he wasn't concerned with the narrator point of view, like have it first person and he die.
Yeah.
And this is something obviously Lovecraft never figured out. You can just do that.
You can just do that. It's okay. It's all right. You know, or if it were a longer story, you know, if there were more of it, because what I find with this story is it's very truncated. There is all this atmospheric stuff about the nature of the huts and the buildings built up at the beginning of these rural spaces, and then it doesn't really pay off at the end.
It does feel like it's going to go other places, and I think in a way it does, because it's the grounding for all of this stuff about sort of Massachusetts, and
of course,
and sort of all of the others come out of it. I think this is the first one where Arkham is mentioned.
Is it? Wow! So that makes it historic. That makes it historic.
But if it's not the first, it's certainly amongst the first. He's definitely laying down the ingredients.
Yeah, that does make it interesting. But I also think Lovecraft as a writer just moves away from this material. He's not that interested in mundane horror. He's not interested in worldly horror.
He doesn't. I don't think he has the stamina for this kind of characterization. It's a lot of work for any author to do characterization on a minutiae level, especially when you've got more of it going on than is apparent here.
Right.
And he, as you say, it's not his main area of curiosity.
Or expertise.
Yes, that's the other thing.
It's just not his thing, is it? He doesn't do characters.
Yeah, he's struggling with it. And maybe like the lightning bolt is almost like his kind of frustration at
there's kind of a feeling of that. It's like, I don't know what to do with the end of this story. It's almost, there is a, you know, Stephen King is often, it's often said of Stephen King that he can't write endings. And very often at the end of Stephen King stories, you get something very like this, where it's the Overlook Hotel blowing up, which I hate, by the way, in the book. I hate that ending. I hate its guts, especially compared to the Kubrick Shining, which has a wonderful ending. You get at the end of The Stand, the hand of God coming down because he can't think of how to end it. That's what you get a lot of, and that's what you get here, the Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah. And Lovecraft doesn't always fall. I mean, Lovecraft's endings, I guess, are fairly rote. They tend to end with the character just drifting into madness.
Yeah, that's usually it.
And it's not a Deus Ex Machina because those endings do fit in the story. They
make sense, yeah.
Yeah, you could accuse it of being, I think, formulaic. Certainly, like the 200th time he uses it.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? But not much of one.
No,
There is often this sense that like it's also it's very, you have that problem with a lot of Lovecraft stories that you have with found footage, funnily enough, where it's like, why are they writing this down?
Yes.
But what service is this? What function has this? And how are they doing it? Like, why are they writing stuff like, "Oh my God, it's at the window. I hear it on the stairs." Ah.
I mean, they're like, Lovecraft is just collapsing into this fundamental problem of like, he has to justify the narration, and the contradiction of that is just tearing the story apart. But
Right.
I think like with the rest of it, I think there is a sense that his characters are possessed by a need to tell, and that the need to tell is itself an evil. Like, and I think like that's apparent in this story, where he talks about things, secrets that should be forgotten, but it's obviously most explicit at the beginning of the Call of Cthulhu.
Right, of course.
Maps that out as like a philosophy.
The end of Dagon, of course.
Yeah. Like telling it is bad.
That's the knowledge is corrupting. I mean, that's a very Lovecraftian trope anyway, isn't it? The notion that there are things that man is not meant to wot of, effectively.
I mean, we talked earlier about the way that Warhammer 40,000 picks up on Lovecraft, and I guess that's like one of the key ways it does it, like the sense of knowledge as itself dangerous.
Yes, it's a corrupting influence, and almost like in many ways a sentiently corrupting influence.
Yeah, it's. I mean, they've got a very worked out metaphysics for that, but with Lovecraft, there's a sense that just knowing any of this is itself a really bad thing.
Well, just like naming the creatures can bring about catastrophe, can't it? Or it can induce madness or mutation.
Yeah, actually, and it's. I mean, there's always that sense of like place and lineage being haunted, but also language is very haunted in Lovecraft. Words are haunted, and I always come back to the fact that like there's a lot of emphasis put on these kind of scientist characters, like in this story.
Of course,
and Lovecraft of science quite a lot of opening up new vistas that are dangerous, and there's that whole conflict he has with modernity. But when it comes to his real sense of the horror, it's often poets, musicians, it's people who sort of look too far within.
It's people who unlock things, isn't it? People who solve puzzles, funnily enough, which in many respects has an overlap with the imagery you find in Barker, which is interesting.
Definitely. I mean, like, obviously Barker's never going to be reconciled to Lovecraft.
No.
But there are obvious links.
The way he treats, in the that wonderful Twitter channel, what is it, the Midnight Society, the way their caricature of Barker treats Lovecraft is basically how Barker thinks of Lovecraft in reality. It's very well researched.
I did like following those when I was on Twitter. They definitely did justice to J.Q.
Oh, the Midnight Society is absolutely wonderful. It's really funny. It's that very clever comedy of boiling down essences to a caricature and doing it brilliantly. I mean, just so appositely. It's quite wonderful, and I love the fact that you've got Barker as the straight guy, the one who's just like sees the absurdity for what it is, and runs with it,
which is very accurate. He's not, I mean, like compared to the neuroses of these other people.
Wow.
I mean, like he certainly doesn't come anywhere close to Lovecraft.
No.
I think very few people do. I mean, as much as I was saying I enjoy the caricature of J.K. Rowling, like
the sibilance, the hissing, it's so funny. It is so funny.
Stuff. Yeah. I mean, they get her as this sort of very neurotically sad person, really, which is, I just can't imagine like having all of that money and being obsessed with the sort of moral panic stuff she is.
I crack up whenever Mary Shelley turns up, and she's like a punk. She's got, she comes, "What's up, bitches?" I love that. I love that to bits. There was one, I can't remember what was going on, but J.K. Rowling was saying something that was upsetting her, and she was cracking her knuckles around the fire, which is like so funny. This is so brilliant.
That's very apt. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I need to go back and read Mary Shelley's stuff. I read a lot of I read there's a one that's almost never read. It's sort of it's called The Last Man.
Yes.
A long while back. It's a very strange piece. It's not as well developed by any measure as Frankenstein, obviously.
Well, what is?
Absolutely. But it's this kind of it's kind of a first in lots of really weird ways. It's sort of the end of the world kind of story, and it's got this kind of the final people alive kind of thing,
right? Which is very rare at the time of writing. Very rare. I mean, like that kind of nihilism really wasn't part of the Victorian psyche, was it?
She was almost a progenitor. I mean, what's interesting about it is it's actually a very sentimental book in many respects for its plot. I mean, she does the thing of having all of the sort of various characters based on all of the different men in her life. So there,
of course, well, that happens quite a lot, doesn't it, in Shelley?
Absolutely, yes. And so you have you have the Byron character.
I was going to say, not to cast aspersions, but boy, were there a lot of men in her life.
Yes,
and women too, by all accounts.
Yeah. And she did idolize them. I mean, that book really shows to the degree to which she idolized the people in her life. Like they're not quite the flawed people that they actually were by any account. And they're just sort of trying to heroically save the world until sort of the inevitable occurs. But it's an interesting one. There's kind of a lot there. I wouldn't exactly trust Mary Shelley to design a political system after reading it, given her elaborate faith in a certain set of aristocrats. But,
probably not. But I mean, I actually reread Frankenstein recently. I made the grand mistake of rewatching that awful Ken Branagh adaptation.
Yeah.
And wow, that was a mistake. So I went and reread the book, which is beautiful.
It's hard to do. It's really hard to get right. You've got to have the right sense of pathos and gravity to it, and it's so wrought in cliche now, like Dracula.
Right, of course, it's one of those stories where you can't tell it straight anymore. It doesn't work because everybody knows the beats of it. Even people who have never watched any of the films, never read the book, know the beats of this story.
Yeah, I mean, you just know it from things like The Simpsons, even.
Right.
Yeah, it's all.
It's all there, isn't it? It's in cultural consciousness, so it's very difficult to tell. And funnily enough, Frankenstein, I would say there are not many good adaptations of that story. There are just not, because of course they tend to, for some reason, adapt the Universal film adaptation rather than the book.
I think you could go wrong with the book as well. I mean, the book has the really tortured stuff in the cottages.
Yes.
It kind of just feels like it doesn't end. Like you started, you kind of like you're bored almost the second it happens, and then it just keeps going for no apparent reason. She's got some really odd stuff going on there, and it none of it really works. And the worst thing is, of course, the rest of the book is actually really well paced, and then it just sort of slogs the whole thing down. And the ending is fantastic. I mean, the ending is one of the best things about the story. I mean, she really crystallizes the pathos in that conclusion. I mean, we're sort of talking about a terrible ending with Lovecraft, and that's kind of I'd say almost the inversion. I think she struggled with plot sometimes, but absolutely excellent sort of conclusions.
It's beautiful, the ending. It really is. I mean, what I love about the book is I think many people who come to it are really surprised. They're really surprised, having watched the films, of course. They're surprised that the monster speaks so much. He's so loquacious. He's quite a chatty Cathy, isn't he? And also that a lot of the iconic imagery that's associated with that story isn't in it.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the way. I mean, that's the way with Dracula as well.
Right. I mean,
more there, but
I think what always gets me whenever I come back to Dracula, again, it's what a chatty Cathy he is at the beginning of the book, where he's basically flirting with Jonathan Harker, and he just doesn't shut up.
There's a real sense that he's been bored.
He's got company for he's actually got the company of what of course the writer, certainly Bram Stoker, would have considered an urbane British person as opposed to a superstitious Transylvanian peasant.
Yeah, and I mean, I also think that also gets at like the ambiguity of Stoker for that character for Dracula, because there's a sense in which Dracula is. I think it's been read often as sort of Irish Protestant guilt kind of manifesting the predating aristocrat on peasant society.
Yes, the predating foreign aristocrat, who's actually come over here and is going into the bedrooms of our women and making them like him. Yeah, there's definitely that reading.
It becomes this kind of xenophobic thing, but also like if you read it back into the sort of colonialism of Ireland and such, that sort of has other connotations as well. But also like he's kind of besotted with Dracula, and as is I think Helsing.
Right.
Like,
yeah, there is
besotted.
There's a fascination, isn't there? And there would be, wouldn't there? I mean, like, if something like this, something that's preternatural, was it actually turned up? Well, you kind of would be, wouldn't you?
But it's kind of the interesting thing is because it contradicts Helsing's ideology so much. Like Helsing is the arch sort of Protestant predestination. Fire and brimstone to the end. And then just absolutely entranced by the occult and by everything that Dracula, and you get this. There's almost a sense of envy.
Definitely. I mean, it's actually really well captured in the Francis Ford Coppola adaptation from 1992.
Yeah.
Where he's played by Anthony Hopkins. The sense of joy that Hopkins brings to that role is incredible. The almost infatuation that's going on.
I think what Hopkins does really well is he makes Helsing such a perverse character.
Right, such a perverse character and a slightly mad character as well.
Yeah. And you don't get, like, when he has to do horrible things, quote unquote, reluctantly. There's not much sense of that reluctance. Like,
no. He seems to rather relish it.
Yeah, murdering a new vampire who hasn't actually done anything and such is just and everyone else should just get over themselves with their Catholic superstition and sentimentality.
Right. I mean, there is that great sequence just after where they've basically staked and hacked off the head of Lucy Westenra, where Mina Harker and Jonathan Harker are in a pub having dinner, and Mina asks him, "Oh, doctor, was Lucy in great pain?" And he goes, "Yeah, she was in great pain, and then we drove a stake through her heart and cut off her head, and then she found peace."
Yeah, it's like really brutal. It's
brilliant, absolute brilliance. I just love it to bits. I love that adaptation for all of its faults. I love that adaptation.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a flawed word, but it does. I think it captures a lot of the sensibilities. I think there's a big sort of. I understand there's quite a generational gap in terms of appreciating that film. The people who are sort of adults when it came out, sort of young adults who came out, generally don't seem to like it, but sort of our generation and younger seem to
rather enjoy it. I mean, for me, the critics absolutely loathe it. It is not a well-regarded film by and large, and I find that quite incredible because it seems to me a lot of the criticisms miss the point of it. It's so clear to me that Francis Ford Coppola and everyone else involved sat around a table at some point and said, look, how many adaptations of this story have there been? How many can you name, right? The Bela Lugosi ones, the Christopher Lee ones, the Hammer films, all the BBC adaptations. There are hundreds. Everybody knows this story, so we can't tell it straight, okay? We can't tell this in earnest. What we've got to do is make it overt, make it this ridiculous horror pantomime, and that's what they do. It is so sumptuous. The film is so colourful and so ridiculously overwrought, and I love it for that. I love the fact it just goes there. It goes for the colour, the violence, the eroticism. There's almost like a giallo quality to it.
Yes, yeah, I think there is actually. It's not quite as all over the place, I guess, as that would imply, but it does have that exuberance.
Yeah,
and I think like if you'd done the film that the critics had wanted, it would have been better received, and it probably would have been a good film, but it would be almost entirely forgotten now.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And people remember the luridness of it. They remember the theatricality, and it is overwrought. I mean, it's completely overwrought. The acting is all over the top and wonderful, apart from Keanu Reeves, of course.
That is a singular performance.
It's it's the bum note, effectively. You've got to sort of forgive it, to be honest. It's so clear that is the studio. That is the people with the money saying, look, Keanu Reeves is hot right now. He's young. Let's put him in it. But what they don't seem to understand is you've got him against Richard E. Grant, Anthony Hopkins. It is never going to work. It is never going to work.
It's almost amusing. Like it's kind of funny in points. I mean, the accent he puts on is...
Oh, he's straining so hard, isn't he? Bless his heart. Yeah. I mean, he really is. He's very young at that point as well, isn't he? Like, he's very young at that point. But playing against Gary Oldman, who is just a force of nature in that film. He's loving every second of being Dracula. No less ridiculous. He's doing that amazing accent, which is like, I don't even know what it is. It's I don't know.
It's something
vaguely sort of Eastern European, I think you could say.
I love the glasses that he wears in the daylight. The tinted. They're just there's just so many like details. Like, he almost looks like he's going to be in like a David Bowie album or something.
Yes, yeah, he does. Yeah. He does. I mean, he looks amazing when he. I mean, they that's another thing they go for in that adaptation: eroticism, which is sort of implied in the book, but it's only implied. It is not as overt as it is here. Romance and eroticism are just bound up in this adaptation, and so they make him sexy. They make him a really sexual, beautiful character.
I think that's something almost every Dracula adaptation has run up against, which is, how do you convincingly make this monster beguiling? Because the book doesn't. The book
he's just a monster. He's just a monster in the book. It's kind of dull in many respects. There is one thing I really dislike. I love the early sequences of the book where it's completely gothic. It's wonderful. Yeah. Those moments are wonderful. When it transitions to London, it kind of loses me.
I like bits of it. I mean, I like the relationship of the three suitors to each other.
Oh, that's sweet. Yes, that's very sweet. Quincy, Dr. Seward, and the other one.
Yeah. I mean, they're all really good characters. And they, I mean, there's a lot of, and they kind of offset the brutality of the book as well quite a lot. Sorry, go on.
No, so it was just that the female characters in the book are just so forgettable.
Oh yeah,
forgettable. They're basically carbon copies of one another, and they're put on pedestals as these icons of purity. Oh god.
I mean, it definitely, if Lovecraft couldn't write women, then Bram Stoker couldn't either. And maybe Lovecraft took the better path of not trying.
Just not bothering. Maybe that's the cleverer way to do it, to be perfectly honest. The only time they become interesting is when they become vampires, funnily enough.
Yeah, because then he can just make them monsters. And actually, he makes them more characters. I mean, when women become monsters with Stoker, they become more characters in a way than Dracula is. Like, Dracula is actually less well defined than the female vampires that he creates around him.
Once it transitions to England, he hardly is in it. He's known by his effects, and that's it, really.
Yeah, I think that's Stoker is struggling to describe this presence in a believable context. I think he does it through implication to sort of get around that problem. But
whereas the Francis Ford Coppola one does it beautifully.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, for all of its whatever faults it might have, it actually does that really, really well. And I love the love affair between him and Mina. I think that's really beautiful.
The Francis Ford Coppola film is much more cynical about Victorian England in general, and I think that's why it can situate the monstrous in that context, because it isn't actually, the monster doesn't really come across as very foreign to Francis Ford Coppola's Victoriana. It just kind of fits within.
It fits rather well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost more like kind of like something from Hell or something.
Yeah,
you could almost imagine that Dracula being in From Hell.
And he's just so much more a character, isn't he? He's got so much more going on emotionally and intellectually than he does in the book. I mean, in the book, he is just a monster, and the ending of the book is so abrupt. It's so abrupt. They just catch him on his way back to the castle and they kill him, and that's the end. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. There's nothing else. There is nothing else. It's kind of like, well, this he's not that much of a threat, is he? You know?
No, you almost get the sense that in a sort of self-justificatory mode that Helsing has sort of bigged up Dracula at that point. That the sort of ultimate evil.
It's not that ultimate, really.
There's a general sense, I think, like with Helsing, though, that he, because he sees everything as evil, because he exaggerates about everything.
Yeah,
like none of his statements really have a lot of weight.
No, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, he is a very generally scathing person.
Whereas in the film, in the Francis Ford Coppola one, he has a redemptive moment as well. They all do, where he lets Dracula go. He said he has that line, "We've all become God's madmen."
Yeah.
And he lets Mina do it. He lets Mina sort of redeem Dracula. So there's an extra layer there.
I mean, I think with that is that like the book is unaware that, I think unaware is the right term, that Helsing needs redeeming.
Yeah, absolutely. Or Dracula, for that matter.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, in the book's terms, because of the predestinationism, it's not so much that Dracula doesn't need redeeming; it's just that he can't be.
He can't be. Yeah, he's just damned. He's self-damned, isn't he? No, I really like that adaptation. I mean, it is the trend, isn't it, for Dracula adaptations to try and complexify the character and to make him more ambiguous and more interesting. It rarely works. It's often very poorly handled.
I'm definitely thinking of the latest BBC
I
adaptation.
rewatched that. I rewatched that recently, and it's bad. It's just really bad. I mean, it's
just the last episode. That is.
Wow.
There's so many things wrong with it.
It's that same problem I have with Moffat's writing a lot of the time. There are really good ideas. There are glimmers of excellent ideas. So this notion of Dracula's character being determined by the lives that he drinks, right?
Yeah.
So that's very clever, and that is very interesting. There could have been so much done with that. So why couldn't they have contrasted? So the reason the cross works on him as an icon of repulsion is because he drank the blood of superstitious peasants.
Yeah.
And they feared the cross. They feared the oppression of the church. So it becomes an icon of, that kind of works. I like that. It's a very clever idea. Why couldn't they have contrasted that with him in the postmodern era, drinking the blood of nihilistic lost youth? What could they have done with that? That could have been such a brilliant social commentary, couldn't it? It could have been wonderful, but they don't. They just don't.
And fundamentally, that version is really odd about the I forget her name, the girl that he drinks.
Lucy. It is Lucy.
Yeah, the Lucy character. Yeah. I mean, she's not done much service to in that version.
Really not.
it's almost so bad that I can't believe it was intended to be as bad as it is. Like,
Yeah.
like they at some point seem to have a scathing for her that is bordering on madness, and at other point,
there's almost like there's a horrible sort of misogyny mixed with a paedophobia, like a fear of youth. Embodied in her, and it's again it's this thing of I hesitate to say it, but older men writing younger women and really not understanding at all.
There is a real sense of just sneering, I think.
Yeah, total sneering.
And that's completely at odds with the ship part, where there's quite a lot of different characters from different social stations, and they're all flawed. Yeah. But there's like a lot more nuance and grace applied to everyone, and then you get to the modern era, and it just
falls apart. Completely falls apart. It just doesn't work.
A lot of it becomes old man yelling at sky. Unfortunately,
very much so. Very much so. There's that notion of jumping the shark. This like jumps into the outer stratosphere, doesn't it? It jumps the entire ocean.
And it's not just, I don't think it's just Moffat. I think the whole of BBC is more and more taking that sort of old man yells at sky approach as it becomes such a moribund and calcified institution with so little innovation in it.
I think so. I mean, there's the I find myself referring to the more recent era of Doctor Who, and it's such a shame because I really wanted it to work. I wanted it to work to just shut up the people who didn't like the fact that the character is a woman now. Unfortunately, it is just terrible.
Yeah, bad writing is bad writing.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's just also they did that horrible thing where they clearly got cold feet. How many wonderful, quirky, interesting woman actors and comedians are out there who could have played the Doctor? They went for Downton Abbey. They went mainstream.
No, I think that's true. Yeah, they didn't.
The safe option. And I'm really sorry, she doesn't work.
I'm not a huge, because she did before that she did the sort of comedy stuff with I can't remember their names. Very middle of the road English comedians occasionally get some good things. They did the Are We the Baddies with the Nazis.
David Mitchell and the other one.
Something Wed,
yes, the other one.
I don't dislike them. They sometimes have some they have some good stuff and there's some bad stuff. I'm never going to watch David Mitchell on those kind of like more talky show type things because they're just insufferable. But some of his skits are okay. But she was I think their opposite in those
right.
She was called in, so that was what I mostly knew her from, and she just didn't seem to have a lot of range. I could see it. But I mean, I wasn't gonna. I was careful not to say it because I didn't think she was well cast when she was cast, but I didn't want to join the sort of vague mob of misogynists who didn't like her being cast because she was a woman.
She's a woman, right? That's the problem, isn't it? But there are so many interesting. The thing is, when it comes to like the casting of the previous male Doctors, they've always gone off piste. They've gone for people who are strange and weird and who have done odd things, rather than these mainstream actors.
It's true. I mean, I've not always agreed with their casting. I mean, I actually really like who's the young one?
Matt Smith.
Yeah, Matt Smith. But I've never thought he was well cast as the Doctor. I love him as in things like where he does like Christopher Isherwood, for example. He's absolutely fantastically cast as Isherwood. There was problems with the writing during the Matt Smith years as well, serious problems.
Very serious problems. I always got the impression it's the same thing with Peter Capaldi. Now, Peter Capaldi is my favourite of the Doctors. I think he is amazingly cast. But the writing is generally pretty bad during that era.
Yeah, it's variable, but he doesn't. It's not ever sustained when it's good, and he's woefully underused.
He's so underused. I mean, my God, he's like perfect, isn't he? He's the embodiment of that character. He's obviously having a ball playing it, no matter how bad the scripts are, and gets it. He understands it, and they waste him. They waste him so badly.
There are good signs at the beginning that it was kind of not going to go in that direction that was quickly squandered. Like, I liked how they started with him having essentially this kind of panic about his age.
Yeah,
basically.
right. That was fun, wasn't it? That was fun.
And there was a real sense of not even memento mori. It wasn't the fear of death. It was a fear of being old and useless and relegated.
Right.
And those are interesting themes to explore in Doctor Who.
Right.
Like they're not commonly explored themes, like how it's experienced to be old on a show aimed primarily at younger people, and I quite appreciated that, like that. But it just that was kind of the one moment where it showed that kind of sustained depth, and then it just
fell by the wayside. Completely fell by the wayside.
And there's lots of silliness in it. I think the Daleks were really badly handled during the Capaldi years.
Yeah, generally. I mean, it's weird because it is ups and downs. There are some amazing episodes in there, but they're very isolated. They're on their own, you know. There's a very good episode towards the end of Capaldi's run called Heaven Sent, which is good because it's good sci-fi, not because it's good Doctor Who, you know.
Yeah, I mean, often that's the way with Doctor Who. I mean, like, we talked about 40,000 as a grab bag, and Doctor Who is definitely
very
well, all those big sci-fis. I mean, like Star Trek as well is a grab bag. I mean, all the place and so on and so forth. But I mean, I think that's how you work in a long-running show. Sometimes when there's like a very strong concept, that doesn't necessarily. Because I'm currently going through Babylon 5, which is
right.
It's interesting, and that's definitely not a grab bag. Like, it's definitely got influences. It's got bits of Lovecraft. It's got bits of Star Trek. I think undeniably, although it was badly served by Star Trek, sort of ripping it off. But yeah, it's got that, but it's also much more honed than those long running series are. Generally, I'm sort of doing an essay as I go, and I find it very ideologically confused, because on the one hand, its politics is very sort of 1990s neoconservative, and on the other hand, it's really vehemently opposed to fascism and has fascists as its main enemies. So it's kind of I describe it as conservative anti-fascism, which is a kind of almost a contradiction.
I was going to say almost oxymoron, almost.
I mean, there were conservative people who tried to assassinate Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany. So there are definitely historical examples of that. But to have like an ethos of conservative anti-fascism is a peculiar one. And
it is increasingly so. You know, from a present day context, increasingly so.
Star Trek, Babylon 5 couldn't exist as a show today. It's just the way that, I mean, it kind of anticipates things, like a lot of the social problems that go along underneath the main drama in Babylon 5 is very much what we're going through now.
Oh, interesting.
But ideologically, its understanding of those things is non-existent. So it's a really confused thing where it's kind of prophetic, but also completely uncomprehending. All it can really offer is either cliches or kind of rival explanations to the explanations the fascists give, which are essentially just oddly the same as the fascist explanation.
Just
so like the fascist explanation is like aliens are trying to infiltrate humanity and blah blah blah, and like obviously the aliens are like a proxy for Jews and black people and blah blah blah,
as they so often are.
Yeah, but then like no, it's not the aliens. It's actually just this one specific group of very shadowy aliens. That's the same thing.
Right? Yeah, that is not an explanation.
Yeah, it's kind of the ultimate cop out, because it's just almost like you just got the wrong target then. Like, the fascists were right, but they just picked on the wrong.
They just yeah. It doesn't actually tackle the fascism itself, does it? Or the impending violence. It just redirects it.
Yeah, to an even more shadowy, and I'm definitely not going to accuse Babylon 5 of anti-Semitism. I don't think that's there, but I think it's got the logic of anti-Semitism.
Right.
The structure of like, these shadowy influences who are controlling everything, and all the other bad things are being controlled by them. That's like the sort of, the European myth of
course, of the Jewish conspiracy theory. Yeah, it's the New World Order conspiracy theory, isn't it? Which has mutated these days into the really weird sort of David Icke Nibiru stuff.
He's constantly reinventing it. It's like it's almost impossible to follow where he is with his.
Oh, completely. And there are other people who also reinvent it around him as well, who've sort of like fed into it. And I mean, like from the outside, taking it as mythology, as storytelling, it's really interesting. It's so bizarrely fascinating because it's so elaborate. But my God, is it scary to know that people actually believe this? Yes, it is.
I love it when he just becomes banal, because he also does that thing of like following where the other reactionaries are and changing his thing accordingly. And like he got into transphobia, and it's like, oh well, that's just what's going right now. So of course he's
right. So that's what I've got to target. Yeah. There's a cynicism behind it, isn't there? There is like the sense that he doesn't believe a word. It's just it's just the moneymaker for him, as is so often the case with these ideologues. It's so often the case.
It's impossible to know where grift ends and the actual person begins.
Yeah, it so is, and where the sincerity starts. Yeah, very, very difficult.
I mean, you're playing Disco Elysium right now, and that just handles that so beautifully, like
just brilliantly.
Yeah, I mean, like the sense of, see, you have these like 3 or 4 monolithic ideologies, and you can believe any of them and you can act completely sincerely, but the joke is that no one else does. Like you meet these characters and you think they do, like you're going to meet the union boss, so he's going to be the archetype of the socialist, and like he doesn't believe anything. He's totally out for himself and nothing else.
Oh, Evrart. Yes, I've met Evrart. Yeah, he is he's a cynical bastard, isn't he? He's a completely cynical bastard.
And you meet the various fascists, and they're variously just trying to deal with some personal trauma in their lives, or they're just cynics again. You meet I mean, the archetypal capitalist is interesting because she first comes off as very odious, but then she's kind of basically just in this situation where she's just trying to hold it all together. Like
this would be Joyce. Yes, this is the lady on the boat.
Yeah, the one that's visibly made to look like
Margaret Thatcher, right?
Exactly. Right. But then she kind of isn't, because she isn't even really a pragmatist. She's just kind of holding reality.
Just trying to hold reality together, right? And she is also the one who provides the explanation for the metaphysics of this universe, which is kind of interesting.
I mean, she's not even really a strong believer in capitalism. She doesn't really make any defenses for it at all.
Definitely doesn't. No, she is just doing her job, isn't she? She's just trying to keep things from spilling over into chaos, it seems.
I mean, but if you become, one of the things I'm doing in my current Let's Plays, because I did the communist one last time, obviously. This is the clearly one I would go for.
Right, the natural one,
so I decided I'd try and play this one just completely straight as like an ultra-capitalist.
Right.
And the game does completely change. One thing that changes that I find just absolutely hilarious is you become very easily rich. One of the thoughts you can do with the capitalist, one of the thoughts you start to get, and if you research it, allows you to earn $1 every time you say something capitalist. And there's a lot of opportunities. You could just be having conversations and you come out $20-$30 richer having a conversation. I mean, that would be rare, but you can. And you've met the light bendy guy in the latest.
That was brilliant. That just floored me. That I loved that to bits. And the fact that Kim can't see it, the only reason you can see it is because you're such a pleb, effectively.
Yeah, you're so. I mean, it's also like the sense of like to what degree is anything this character is seeing real.
That's a fair point. That's also a fair point. It's Harry, isn't it? So
yeah. I mean, he's, to say damaged. I mean, from the stuff that Joyce has said, you get a sense of how he's been damaged.
Yes,
as well.
you do get the impression that he's passed through the pale, that he's sort of been deposited from the pale, because everything she describes is what he has. It's the symptoms he has. Yeah.
It's not just the alcohol. The alcohol is a kind of red herring.
Yeah, definitely.
But that guy, I think if you're a capitalist, you can for asking him money, you can access a dialogue, and he will give you as an investment. I haven't seen what actually comes of the investment part of this, but he will just straight up give you 100 real,
which is a lot of money in this game.
A huge amount of money. I mean, it's really
wow.
it's really hard to earn money in this game.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, he'll give you it, and the proviso that you're going to invest in some school for young people to teach them capitalism or something. I think Kim respond when you're given the 100 real, Kim just basically is just like shocked into silence. Like Kim just is like apoplectic with like what's going on. He wasn't very happy when I took the giant novelty check, but
he's not happy with me at the moment because I keep asking. He's gotten annoyed with me because I keep asking redundant questions that go nowhere. He's commented upon that.
I mean, he's loyal to a fault, Kim. Like even if you play it as the most accommodating version of the cop, you're still basically a bastard to Kim.
Kim is amazing, isn't he? Kim is he's the sidekick everyone needs. If every human being had a Kim Kitsuragi next to them, life would be the universe would be such a better place.
I was just thinking, like, having like Kim Kitsuragi's in other games, like what it would be like to have Kim Kitsuragi in like Baldur's Gate 2, so just like gently nudging you away from, like, maybe don't like take the mission with the obvious red dragon who's
right. The clear bad guy, right? Yeah, who's called himself something like Lord Fire Drake or something. It's like, well, he's obviously a dragon.
I think he's in like an all red suit as well.
Right. I mean, he even looks. I mean, like he's not even being subtle about it. It's like he's so. It's a dragon, or it's a dragon in disguise. Yeah.
Like if he was like breathing out smoke occasionally, it wouldn't have been more obvious.
Right. It's like, you know how in old stories you get wizards who would disguise themselves, but they're so vain and pompous anyone could see who they are anywhere. It's that, isn't it? It's so clearly a red dragon.
Yeah.
What's his name? Firecrag. That's his name, isn't it? Firecrag. Firecrag. I mean, for God's sake.
That almost reminds me of that the Hot Fuzz film where the obvious villain in that would appear right after a murder, playing music that was redolent of the murder,
and his name is Skinner. It's like, what? It's so brilliant. I love it. I love it to bits.
Yeah.
What I love about the Firecrag mission is if when you actually do find him, he just lets you go. Because you've done the amusing thing, you've played the game.
Yeah. He's not actually after killing you. He's just wants entertainment.
But he is very capable of doing so. I love the dragons in Baldur's Gate 2 because they are some of the very few video game dragons who live up to their reputation. I
mean, I have like a visceral memory of my disappointment of the dragons in Neverwinter Nights. Like
me too.
They are like. I immediately looked at it, and the first thought, and I was obviously much younger then, but my first thought was that it looks like Peter's dragon.
Right.
The kids film.
Yeah.
They are cartoonish in the best possible ways.
They're just not impressive. I mean, they're just not impressive. They're actually very easy to take down.
They're small. They're very weak. I mean, I think like one of the things doesn't get everything right, but. What was that game? It was sort of like billed as the new Baldur's Gate. Obviously.
Oh, Dragon Age. Dragon Age?
No, before Dragon, and it's after Dragon Age. It's much more like a Baldur's Gate game. It's isometric. I do love Dragon Age Origins.
The original one. The dragons in that are amazing.
Yeah.
It's always like it's to the wire, isn't it? With the dragons and that, if you choose to fight them, it's to the wire. They always kill almost all of your party.
Oh, they're really vicious. I mean, Dragon Age really actually like holds up. I think as a game, like the writing in it. I'm not necessarily the second one less so, and the third one.
The third one I just gave up with, if I'm honest. They did that great mistake of trying to make it like an MMO.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's an MMORPG without being an MMORPG.
Right,
So
without all of the fun of an MMO where you get to play with other people. It's just an empty space. I was playing it, I was like, well, is there anything going to happen beyond just me messing about with radial menus? Is there going to be a plot here? Is there going to be character interaction? I mean, I know that it generated controversy because you can have homosexual relationships in it, but it's like, but none of them have any weight like they do in the original Dragon Age.
You could in the second one as well have a lot more sort of different relationships. The second one is okay. There's two things that really make the second one not work for me. The one is the fighting. I love the fighting in Dragon Age Origins. Because every battle is a set piece, and all of them benefit from taking a tactical approach.
Yes, very much so.
And in the second one, it's much more wave after wave of enemies. You have to outlast them. And
which is kind of dull, isn't it?
The other thing is the boss fights, which felt I don't even know how it's possible in that kind of top-down RPG to do this, but it somehow felt like you were fighting one of those cutscene boss fights. Like you were, like pressing buttons to win. You weren't. You were fighting them, but they felt like that. They were huge. They covered half the screen. They fought in different modes, etc.
Oh, so almost like a
yeah.
You
All you could do is just chip them away. Like that's the problem. Like if you just give a huge amount of health to an enemy and a couple of abilities, and they change those abilities, then it's just like, are you going to live long enough to beat this thing? So it wasn't very interesting. I remember the name of the game. I was thinking they're Pillars of Eternity.
Right. You know, I never played it, but I have heard of it.
I think you'd enjoy it. I mean, there's things I don't like about it, and there's things I do. It's not well paced in places. It has a lot of the problems actually of the first Baldur's Gate game.
Oh, interesting.
There's sort of like the sense of it being too much sometimes. Like you could get lost in like a random. It's like a random mine that was controlled by goblins in Baldur's Gate, and then forget like why you were playing at all because it's been so long since you'd even thought of the main plot.
Yes, it's so easy to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, and Baldur's Gate 2 somehow managed to create a sense of expansiveness, but you always knew what you were essentially doing.
What I found with the transition from Baldur's Gate 1 to 2 is 1 is just like, it's just this vast experiment, and it is very like a real D&D game in the sense that like there are just random things all over the place that you just lose yourself in. 2 is really structured. It's really structured, despite having this massive, expansive map where you can go to different places as per your choice and what you want to do. And each one of the set pieces in the different areas is really defined.
Yeah.
Really defined.
So much memory of each of those adventures. Like,
I mean, the one I always remember is The Witch of Umar, The Witch of the Umar Hills, which is the Blair Witch Project. It is absolutely the Blair Witch Project. Did you ever find the journal there?
Yes.
That made me howl when I read that for the first time, and it's Heather's speech from the end of the Blair Witch Project. I'm so sorry to Josh Elias's mom and Mike Elias's mom. I loved that to bits.
No, there's a lot of stuff like that in it, and I love. I mean, we talked about the Red Dragon quest. I love the Behold the Cult underneath the Temple District.
Brilliant! That was the first one I did when I first got the game. That was the very first one I did, and I was just absolutely fascinated. I was just hooked from that moment on.
I think you're supposed to take that one early because although there's a constant sense of looming threat and sort of unimaginable risk with that one. You're never actually asked to do very much. Like,
not really.
It's very much almost a point-and-click adventure style thing where you just go to different places. Like, there's a couple of big fights. There's zombies. There's some shades. Obviously, if you actually try and fight the Beholder, you'll lose.
You will lose, You will lose Big Star because it's a Beholder.
Yes. And they really give that sense of threat. And there is a Lich you can awaken, which,
Yes, Kangax. Yeah, Kangax the Lich.
Yeah, which is not recommendable if you've done it.
You have to find all his bits, don't you?
Yes, it's a dangerous fight.
If you can do it, and if somehow you can win through that early on, my God, you're going to be godlike. through the rest of the adventure, you're going to be godlike. He gives you some really powerful items. You get so much experience from. He's a lich, so he's like a dragon level fight.
Yeah. No, it's a definite one to win if you can. It's just very unlikely.
It's just not almost impossible. Especially you can't even do the normal tricks, where you run away and summon monsters because it's in an enclosed tomb. So there's nothing you can do. If you're going to fight him, you've got to fight him.
You need a paladin with that sword that casts Dispel every time you hit. It's one of the few ways of easily beating liches. I mean, even then, it's not that easy.
Yeah, even then.
Petrify.
But at least you'll be able to get through their defenses.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most OTT weapon in the game. It's I don't know how that even got into the game. Like it's kind of thing like a DM would create and then realize their mistake immediately upon creating.
Yeah.
Like it casts Dispel every time it strikes.
Yeah, that is batshit. And to get it comes quite early as well, doesn't it? In the game, it's quite easy to get.
Do you get it from fighting the Red Dragon? Is that how you get it? I can't remember where you get it from now.
There are two dragons early on. There's the Shadow Dragon, which you don't have to fight. You can sneak past it, but there's the Shadow Dragon, and there's the red one.
The Shadow Dragon doesn't have very much. You get just a huge amount of experience points, but I think you get some treasure.
Yeah, you get the scale that you can make the Black Dragon armor from, which is pretty good. Yeah. That's pretty good.
Yeah. But I think it might be the Red Dragon you get the Dispel sword from. It comes with a huge restriction, of course, which is that only a paladin can wield it.
So you need to have a paladin in your party, which is often problematic in Baldur's Gate 2 because most of them are assholes.
Well, unless your paladin is going to be Korgan, isn't it? Not Korgan.
Keldorn, is it? Is it Keldorn?
Yes.
Yeah, who is massively problematic. He has conflicts with a lot of characters.
Well, if you have anyone evil, it's just not.
Yeah, you're out. It's not going to work. It's not going to work out at all.
You have to have an all-good party to have him. If you have an all-good party, even with a couple of neutrals, he gets on with Jaira, fair enough. Maybe they're both similarly obnoxious, so maybe blend on that one. But
you don't want Viconia.
No. Well, no. I think she's the one. I don't know if he ever comes to blows with the evil dwarf.
Oh, Korgan. I don't know. I think they bait one another, but I don't think they come to blood. I don't think so, anyway.
But Viconia upsets most of the good characters the most.
She does.
She doesn't do very much.
Right, she doesn't actually do much. Okay, she is spiteful. She's kind of a nasty character, but she actually doesn't do a great deal that's that evil.
Whereas Korgan is pretty violent, and pretty extreme in his actions. You can't have Korgan and Aerie in your party together. They eventually come to blows.
Which, to be fair, if I was in the party with Aerie, we'd also come to blows.
She is. There's that whole thing of. It was really popular for a time to talk about. Something like ludonarrative fallacy, the whole thing where the way you play the story contradicts the narrative of the story. And I think an example of that was always given was when you had invariably a woman in a sort of adventure style game whose personality was completely demure and underwhelming and powerless and dependent on men and being saved, but whose character in game was all powerful, magical, could destroy armies of enemies. Yeah, and that's the Aerie problem. Aerie is a cleric mage who can heal an entire party one moment and fire a fireball.
If you have her in your party by the end of the quest, which is the inside of the tent with the genie and everything. Yeah. If you do that quest by the end, she's experienced enough to be one of the best characters in the game at that point, to be one of the most effective characters in the game. So it's that doesn't fit.
Yeah, she's a completely. She is the ludonarrative fallacy, just sort of writ large.
You get it in a lot of JRPGs, of course. JRPGs are absolutely rife with it. Even my favorite ones, like Final Fantasy VII, you get this situation where these characters literally fight apocalyptic engines of destruction and demigods, but they get captured by Shinra soldiers. It's
yeah. It's very like that. I think with her, it's sort of Baldur's Gate 2, as much as it is still one of my favorite games of all time, it doesn't do women very well. Maybe Immerwin is the only exception, and she kind of just gets away with it, partly because she isn't a love interest, which definitely helps.
That helps a great deal.
And she gets around being a love interest because she's, although not a sister by birth, I think it was still.
She's a foster sister, isn't she? Essentially,
still a bit too unseemly to let her be a romantic option.
Yeah.
And then so they just kind of let her. I mean, she's not a brilliant character. She's kind of a typical tomboy, I guess.
But at least she's not annoying. No, there's that, which most of the other female characters are.
And she's actually quite fun to have in a party with other unlikable characters. Like she alongside Minx are very good at taking the piss out of everyone. They're very good at mocking her. Actually, she mocks Khaldun quite a lot. The paladin. She
right.
A lot of goes at him.
Oh,
too,
interesting.
Because I think she's the only good character who mocks him.
Quite rightly as well.
Also, there's Lizzie. I think she's.
Lizzie Fenton. Yeah.
She's probably the only lawful good character I like in the entire game, actually.
Yeah, there are not many. There are not many good lawful good characters. They tend to be violent. They ultimately tend to be violent, don't they?
Yeah. Like they do. I mean, it's not like Minx is very purist about being good, but he's just not horrible.
No, he's not horrible about it. His notion of good is completely. It's almost antipodean to Keldorn's notion of good. It's just it is the case of, well, let's just do the right thing regardless of what the law says. Whereas Keldorn, you get the impression he's more like Darth Vader. You know, if it says this is correct in the scripture and in the law and in the systems, then that's what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would almost say he should be lawful neutral rather than lawful good, but that's probably my ambivalence about the whole D&D alignment system.
Yeah, I've got to say, when I play Baldur's Gate 2, most of my party is evil, even though my character is not, simply because the evil characters are better. They're better written. Viconia's a fine character. You know, she's actually kind of an interesting character. She's got some of the more interesting interactions, and she's got one of the better arcs as well as a character.
She's useful to have as a pure cleric as well.
Oh, she's so powerful. By the end, once you've come through the Underdark, she's a beast. She's an absolute beast.
I mean, cleric, a completely pure cleric like her, and you know, getting her to a high level, she becomes just a really good ancillary fighter, but also, you know, casting spells that just heal the entire party midway through a fight. It's just
pretty amazing. She was always in my final party for the very end of the game. You know, when I say the end, I mean the Throne of Baal, when we fight what's her name, the other spawn of Baal, Melisan, is it something like that?
Yeah. I didn't play that one as much. I played it quite a few times, but it was obviously much later in the day and such. But I do. Yeah, I didn't like the plot line of Throne of Baal. I liked some elements of it.
I liked the various Baal spawn. I thought that was fun, and I liked the way it threw the world into turmoil. That was fun too. And they're the different Baal spawn were well characterized. So there's the dragon twins who are great fun.
I liked the monk as well. He was sort of trying to sort of create. I guess he had an idea of peace that thing. And the Drow one, who was a total cynic, and there was a lot of interesting stuff going on. I think it was a bit disparate, and I think ultimately the thing that undid it was the main villain
it's just not that interesting.
I don't know anything about her. Really.
Yeah, she is no Irenicus. That's for damn sure.
I guess that's the other thing. She's such a kind of step down. Yeah, and I was kind of annoyed that they redeemed Sarah.
Right, Sarevok just comes back, doesn't he? Right.
Sarevok is a totally bad character anyway. He's one of the least interesting things about Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, I mean, he's just like a genocidalist, isn't he? He's just a violent monster, essentially. He is a very boring D&D villain in the first game.
Yeah, and so trying to bring him back and make him complicated just felt really tortured when you already had a complicated villain that you could bring back and redeem. I'm not saying definitely do that with Irenicus, but it would definitely be better than bringing.
Oh my god, could you imagine having the soul of Irenicus on your side? That would have been fantastic, wouldn't it?
Easy to justify the narrative, because Irenicus is technically now also a Ballspawn. He had the soul of a Ballspawn. So
Right.
he's sort of implicated in that legacy.
Wow, that would have been so interesting to have. Yeah, to have him back in a he would have to have been diminished.
Yeah.
He couldn't have been like he was at the end of Baldur's Gate 2.
But because he's died and come back, that's also easy.
Yeah, it's easy. Well, Saravok was diminished, wasn't he, when he came back? He wasn't the monster he was at the end of Baldur's Gate 1. So
they certainly don't use that sprite, the absolutely ridiculous Saravok.
Oh, the big Saravok. No, they don't use that because that would have been silly.
It would have been funny, but yes, it would not have worked.
Would not have worked. Would not have worked.
But yeah, I mean, but you could have used the Ironicus sprite.
It would have been fine. It would have been absolutely. I mean, and also just to get David Warner back, play that role. More dialogue with David Warner would have been nice.
Also, a redemption arc with Saravok could be interesting. Like, there's enough there to redeem. Like, he's a very complicated, ambivalent, deeply tragic and sad villain. And the interactions with the other characters, I think, were more interesting because there's a relationship, a very traumatic one between Immerwin and Irenicus.
Right, and Jaheira, obviously.
Yeah, like there's real animosities there. Whereas with Saravok, like he doesn't really do anything to hurt anybody in the party. There's no okay, you could be angry at him because he made you work for your game in the first one, but that's about it.
That's about it, isn't he? He was the villain once upon a time, and that's as much. There's more tension with Edwin.
Yes, there is. Like Edwin does genuinely awful things.
I love Edwin to bits. Gun to head, favorite character in those games. It's going to be Edwin Odesseron. Love him.
He is a lot of fun. He's love him. Tons of fun. The game is diminished without him. Like if you don't play him, you get a lot less.
The dialogue between him and some of the characters is just joyous. It's absolutely joyous, and the voice actor is having a ball.
Oh yeah, you can tell all the way through. I like that. That's one of the reasons why I often go for Jean Jackson because he's so fun. He's not a very good character to actually have.
No, but he is funny, isn't he? He's got great dialogue, especially with Minsk.
Yes. Oh, the boo stuff. It's
real fun.
It's fantastic. Now he's chaotic neutral, if I remember correctly.
I believe so, which is an odd, really. I think that's the kind of thing that whenever anyone actually turns up to a D&D table with that, everyone is like, oh no.
Well, it's the Captain Jack Sparrow character. That's the thing with some that's why the alignment system doesn't work. Some alignments describe alignments and other alignments describe personalities. Right. Chaotic neutral is 100% a personality and 0% an alliance.
Right. It's really bizarre, isn't it? I mean, you've got. I mean, there's chaotic neutral, isn't it? Which is Hair de Lys. Hair de Lys is chaotic neutral, I do believe.
Yeah. Chaotic neutral, Hair de Lys, John Jackson, and then there's chaotic good is the sort of classic sort of
barbarian character where they have a code of ethics, but it's not prescribed, it's not enshrined in law or anything like that. So it's Minsk, it's those characters.
And then neutral good is just good.
It's just good, yeah.
There's nothing else there. Their personality can be anything else on top of that.
Right. It's just they're generally an okay person. They've got a code of morality that they live by. That's it. But it's not like something they preach or prescribe to other people. I mean, there's always tensions like that. I mean, actually, a good DM will use them. They'll use the tension. So if you've got like a really raging lawful good paladin who's like an evangelical firebrand, and you've got like a necromancer, for example, who is maybe not necessarily evil, although they could be, a good DM can work with that.
I think I had that in a game I played when I was very young. I was playing with a friend of mine called Jack, and I was playing an evil character. He was playing one of these goody paladins.
Yeah.
There was a cluster of dragon eggs, which I tried to persuade him we should take and raise as our pet dragons. They were still red dragons. I didn't think it would work, and it didn't. And we ended up coming to blows for it. And then I just I'm not going to win this fight because I'm a sorcerer and he's a paladin, and we're very close. So it's not going to go well. So I just legged it, and to get to this, we'd gone over this bottomless pit over a plank of wood, classic. So I started just trying to get over this as fast as possible, and he just came bolting over it and snapped the wood, and we both plummeted with the egg into the abyss. I remember that quite fondly. I thought that was a good way to die.
Yeah, that's fun. That is, I mean, it's characterful, isn't it? That is fun. I like that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's what D&D should be for, just like entertaining stories.
Yeah, that is exactly what it's for. And like, you know, the DM could have fudged that so easily to let you get out. If they wanted to continue the story, it would have been so easy to do.
Yeah.
That's what you do as a DM. Part of, you know, a significant. That's what that screen is for. A significant part of your job is kind of fudging to allow the story to continue, even though the character should have technically killed themselves.
Yeah. It's to know when, like, would this be actually a good death? Like, would this actually be an interesting turn in the story? Yeah, absolutely. And to know, like, when, like, chance can add to a story.
Of course. And when the tensions are actually interesting, when you can actually use them rather than just letting them bog you down or mire you down.
The storytelling is the most important part. I think it's quite easy. And that's one of the things the games get right in their linearity. Like, they do. I am actually quite enjoying Baldur's Gate 3. I know there's divergent views in it, and I'm not overly keen on the whole early access thing. I generally stay clear. But it's interesting. I like the storyline. I like the characters. Actually, like is the wrong word. They're all deeply unpleasant people. But I find them interesting.
Well, I like setup, certainly. I mean, anything that involves the Illithid, I'm kind of into. I like those monsters a lot. So
they're making good use of them. I mean, I was very skeptical of that because they just seemed like an enemy you don't have left, sort of at the forefront.
Right.
But I think that they've got the right balance with that, and the world is just interesting. There's a lot of like quirky details. There's this fantastic hag character you meet.
Oh, I like hags. There's often hags in my D&D games.
She's brilliant. She is just the archetypal sort of like that kind of monster. You know, she's vile all the way down. Sort of.
Because they are, aren't they? I mean, in D&D, hags are like they're the dark side of the Feywild, aren't they? They're like the elves and the fairies are the positive side, and the hags are negative nature. Essentially, they're twisted nature. I love them. I love the different species of hags. You know, the green hags and the ones that are like trolls that are like big and bulky and have got like rock-like skin.
And the way that they sort of chant everything in their huts. So, like, the one thing you never would want to do is fight a hag in their hut.
No, you don't want. I mean, there's rules now for like the Baba Yaga style huts that walk and slither along, which is really cool.
Yeah, they do a good job of her dwelling as well. Like, one of the things is that she's in this swamp and she's cast a spell so that it appears as beautiful, verdant, lush forest.
Of course.
There's these sheep just walking around, which is curious because there's no like sheep anywhere else in the game. You start going up to them, and if you dispel it, they reveal to be they're another evil red caps.
Red caps. Oh no!
But they still think that they're under the illusion's protection, so they think you see them as sheep. So you go over to them and talk to them. And they'll look at you with like their sort of hideous faces and those like big bulging red eyes, and they'll just like go like bah, like with like spittle and everything, like just like really over the top, like completely unconvincing, and they just like walk away.
I like that.
It's really good. There's a lot of touches to the game that's they've got the right ethos. Whether they'll finish it is a different question.
And whether it will have like the thing that always gets me about the original Baldur's Gate games is how they swell into something like metaphysically epic and brilliant. I mean, to the point whereby now the Baalspawn saga is actually part of the D&D lore. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. There's comic books. There's novels.
Yeah. It's mentioned in the books, you know, the Baalspawn saga is mentioned, the point at which the time of troubles when the gods walk the earth, and I mean there are still Baalspawn around, you know, there are descendants of Baalspawn still knocking about in the realms. He is not the god of murder anymore, is he? It's someone else now.
Yeah, they changed portfolios, so to speak.
Yeah, it's shifted to I can't remember who it is, who the new god of murder is.
But yeah, you are right. It has altered.
Mind you, they do that quite often. There are often situations where, like, gods, and certainly like the demons, the demons and devils that rule the abyssal planes, they shift around quite a lot.
The implication is that the sort of stuff, I mean, it's a bit like 40k in the sense in that the mortals' ideas of the gods change the gods. So as culture changes, the gods change.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. I mean, in D&D, I mean, you have this whole notion of the outer planes. So it is just like 40k or like AOS, where emotions and thoughts and beliefs and stories have physical manifestation somewhere.
I mean, in that excellent Beholder plot in one of the things I love about it is you meet the dead god or dying god,
right?
With all of his acolytes, who are being kept alive by this god, so that in turn they can keep the god alive by being the last believers.
Right.
So trapped in this purgatory then, because the god won't let them die. So
it's so cool, isn't it? I mean, there is actually, I can't remember what it's called, but you can actually include the husk of a dead god in your D&D campaign. They're big monsters. They look like big, like, metaphysical fetuses. But they are like they're not end of quest, they are end of campaign bosses. They're basically the gods that have just lost belief. They've shriveled into almost nothing, but they're still incredibly powerful because they used to be gods, I
mean, I think this one was guarding the artifact that's used to kill the beholder, and once you promise to kill the beholder, it lets go.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I can't remember who the god is off the top of my head, but yes, I remember that.
It's really good, and they voice it really well. They voice it with that it's got this sort of like, it's both resounding and it's got multiple voices all sort of speaking at once, but it's also dried out and hollowed out and tired. It's got this sort of sense of exhaustion.
Oh yeah, because you go right down, don't you, into that really wretched place that's deep underneath the temple district, where the worshippers of the god still wander in this almost twilight state.
It's really wonderful in the sense that, like, it you go into the temple district, you sort of catch intimations of this, and then that storyline that immediately pulls you in the sewers just tells you everything about religion in D&D. It tells you how this all works.
So you've got like a sort of cyclical thing going on with the gods, like new gods arise and old gods die off, and as new religions come about, new gods start to spawn.
And Baldur's Gate does that over and over again. Like, for example, the mission around the planosphere thing, the sort of big planar that gets your base if you're the wizard. Like, that teaches you about magic and how the planar system works.
It's brilliant, that quest. I love that quest to bits. That's always the one I want to do as early as possible.
Yeah, well, especially as I tend to play a sorcerer, so that's
likewise. Sorcerer, it's always going to be a sorcerer. I love sorceress to bits.
Until I learned, so eventually I learned. So if you played a multiplayer game but just using one player, so it's just you, but you're playing on multiplayer mode, and you don't have any other characters, because you can use a multiplayer game to have like a whole team that you design.
Yeah.
I don't generally enjoy that because of course none of them speak. So
all the role playing is gone, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, if you wanted to, like, just game Baldur's Gate, I guess you could do that, but it's not the kind of game to do that with. But one of the things I learned that you could use it for is you could swap out characters by having the multiplayer game. So you can create a character of every different class, and you can get all of the different bases with your sorcerer. So because you just make sure you swap out the right class for that dialogue at the end of each particular quest. So I did like to do that. Like, have a castle, if I remember correctly. I think this is something I did, and there's other things you can do. You can have a safe multiplayer game in a particular place, so you can take your character to that place. And I didn't do that to skip levels, but I did it because there was a particular area where a character will give you XP at the end of a quest, and then if you talk to her again, she'll just keep giving you XP. It's quite a lot. So I had a saved multiplayer game there, so I could level up my character at the beginning of the game to the highest possible level, and then play the whole of Baldur's Gate 2 with like an epic level character.
I must admit, I used to do something like that. Like, you needed to have the Throne of Baal add-on, but you start Throne of Baal and import your character, and instantly get, like, because it's such a high level, it just assumes you finished the previous games. It just instantly gives you, I think, like a ridiculous amount of XP.
Yeah,
and then you just
do that.
Export the character back to the beginning of the game.
Yeah, I do the both things. So, because one of the problems with my method is you're still basically just collecting XP and waiting to level up. So it would take a long time. So I'd usually have a program playing, and I'd just be like clicking over and over and over again on this character to get the XP. But obviously, when Throne of Ball came out, you could bypass a lot of that time by just having start a higher level character. But the things you could do, like going through like those early levels of Baldur's Gate 2 with the highest level of character,
yes, so much fun.
Like you're just like just out there like disintegrating imps and petrifying things,
casting like the wild magic sphere in the middle of Arm. So much fun.
Or you can like get those annoying wizards who come and attack you if you use magic.
Oh, the grey wizards, yeah.
And you can just keep beating them.
Yeah, and getting really
like
cool magical trinkets,
Yeah, you can do quite a lot of stuff. I mean, it's definitely in the cheating territory, but
I mean, one of the fun things to do is go into the middle of like a really crowded area and use Gate and bring in like a Baylor or a demon and just watch it massacre everyone.
Yeah, you could do a lot. It's great. Gate is a great spell, and I mean some of the summoning spells you get.
Wild! They're wild. Like, I mean, the Solars that you can summon, the angels, effectively, they are insane.
In Baldur's Gate 2, you can effectively just summon one of those and have it play a dungeon for you.
Yes. Yes, you can. Yeah. Really, all you really need is summon the planar, and then if you're a sorcerer, take Mordenkainen's sword, because you can summon 5 of them. And they're very hard to beat. They're very hard to beat, the Mordenkainen's blades. So you send them all through the dungeon, and they just clean the dungeon out.
Nothing in terms of like orcs and stuff is going to stand against that. So it's just going to be I mean, that's the thing with Throne of Ball. You're fighting epic level enemies for the most part. And those dungeons didn't always work very well. They were kind of unbalanced in places.
Some of them are very tricky unless you use certain naughty tactics to get around them. I always think of the Underdark areas, so the areas where you've got like nests of beholders.
Yeah, those areas are generally
I mean, beholders can literally disintegrate your characters, like they can kill them permanently.
I always find Illithids really difficult. Because you send up your fighters against them, obviously, and then your fighters have low intelligence, and
so they cast confusion on them, and then that's it. They're done. Or they cast mind control on them, and they use them against you.
Even if they're just fighting them, though, because the beholders don't just do damage, but they do damage to the intelligence score, and when the intelligence is 0, they die. So actually, a fighter can't take many hits from the Illithid. They even if it's just in a 1-to-1 combat without the Illithid doing any tricks, it's difficult. And then the Illithids usually come with those Underdark creatures, the sort of bug-like ones.
Yes.
So they're not. Illithids are definitely not a fun enemy to face. I think they're very they're quite nerfed in 5e by comparison to what they were. They're nothing.
Well, there was a time when they were like end of campaign monsters. They were big bad monsters. They're much more common now.
Yeah, I think that's kind of partly what Baldur's Gate 3 is tapping into. I mean, there's obviously stuff behind the beholders in Baldur's Gate 3. Like, there's a lot going on. Nobody knows what, because the game is out.
Right. I mean, I'd assume it must, because it's called Baldur's Gate, so I'd assume it must be linked somewhere, somehow, to what's gone before.
I assume so. They're being very sort of coy about that. There's obviously some kind of project to create a new god.
Now that's interesting.
like I think that's kind of obvious from what we've seen so far. And they're obviously using the Illithids to do it. The Illithids are part of this, either willfully part of this project, or they're being
or
manipulated.
they've been conned, basically.
And Illithids actually, I think, have a history of being conned because they're quite desperate for the return of their empire and stuff.
Right, they're a fallen race, aren't they? They are effectively like a fallen alien race.
Yeah. They once were, I think, the dominant species in the multiverse.
Wasn't it the Gith? It was the Gith, wasn't it, who raised... They were their slaves at one point, and the Gith raised up against them and shattered their empire.
Yeah, so there's the Gith Zura and the Gith Yankee, and the Gith Yankee... Well, they were the one race when they raised up, and then...
They splintered, didn't they, into different factions.
Yeah, so the Gith Yankee decided that they wanted to spend the entirety of eternity fighting just the Illithids, and to make their entire society a kind of warlike fascist one to do that. And I think they're now effectively controlled by a Lich Queen.
Now that's interesting.
She's a piece of work, to put it and the Gith Zura decided that, like, having got their liberation, they certainly weren't friendly to the Illithids, but they didn't want to make that their entire lot, and so they became kind of ascetic and noble.
They're like monks, aren't they? They're effectively monkish characters.
Yeah, the Gith Yankee regard them as heinous rebels, and Gith Zura as much as they hate the Illithids, arguably even more. But yeah, so there's those two factions are at constant loggerheads. I think that you get a Gith Zura with you in Torment.
You do, yes. He's one of the main characters. He's one of the first companions you generally tend to get. And
they're quite likable, the Gith Zura. I mean,
they're amenable. They're neutral, aren't they? They're neither one nor the other. They're not good or evil. They're neutral characters. Mind you, all the characters in Torment are amazing. All of them are. They are the best written of the NPCs. There's no doubt.
In Baldur's Gate 3, you end up with a Gith Yankee in your party.
That's interesting.
So she reminds me oddly. She reminds me a bit of the woman peacekeeper in Farscape who ends up with the crew.
Right.
She's basically that. She's basically like a kind of. She's from a fascist faction. She's with a bunch of outcasts who are sort of, not that, obviously.
Clearly.
And she's kind of just dealing with them on like initially on a provisional basis, like,
yes,
I'm going to tolerate these.
I will deal with this for as long as I have to.
Yeah, the greater threat being the Illithids, so I will make do. That's very much her character. None of the characters are good though. There's two characters who present as noble, but they both have serious question marks over them. One of them is a what is the class that makes deals with devils and such? The
warlocks.
Warlock, yeah, and of course, no matter how good a warlock is, there are questions.
Well, questions. The problem with a warlock is, I mean, playing a good or a neutral warlock is really interesting because there's always tension between them and their benefactor.
Yeah, and I think there is definitely there. And it's interesting because this warlock is played good, but then will do sudden things like if it comes to serving his agenda of getting to his benefactor, he'll start torturing people and doing all kinds of stuff.
Because they have no choice in the matter. I mean, they've often made such a pact that if they don't, it's not just the case that they'll lose their power or anything like that. They'll probably lose their soul in the process.
And then there's a wizard who is a former lover of Mithra, I think is her name, and that sets up. I mean, he presents as sort of goodier than good, but like the link up, again, suspect, and then there's a lot of sort of hubris there. So yes.
I mean,
Mithra is amongst the more neutral gods, she's one of the more spiteful. To put it
definitely.
She's certainly willing to cause a lot of harm.
I really love the fact that you can do that now. That there are parties where you can get tension, so you can have like a Red Wizard of Thay in a party now, and they are awesome. The Red Wizards of Thay, because they're so vile. They have made an ideology out of complete selfishness, you know? They're essentially the objectivists.
Yeah, I was going to say the Ayn Rand objectivists.
Yeah, they are exactly the
Yeah.
objectivists of the. If they're not based on Ayn Rand's writings, I will eat my hat. It's Edwin. It's Edwin's law.
Yeah.
Edwin is a red wizard of Thay. Although, of course, in Baldur's Gate 2, he's having problems with the Thavians.
He's a bit of a failed red wizard of Thay.
Yeah. Which is easy to do by all accounts. And if they don't like failure, obviously, if you tarnish their reputation, they are going to destroy you.
Well, he doesn't like it either. He just kind of lives in a perpetual denial.
Oh, I love that, don't you? He's in his own mind, he is like the superior specimen. Yeah. And he's tolerating you.
Yeah, even when you're on the cusp of becoming a god.
Right. I love that. I mean, again, he's painted as an evil character. He never does anything that terrible either.
I think he's involved in stuff before.
In Baldur's Gate 1, he's a villain. I mean, he's a straight villain in Baldur's Gate 1. But in Baldur's Gate 2, he's a bit bumbling, isn't he? He's slightly comic relief.
He's utterly reduced by that point, so there's nothing much he can do. Like, he's fundamentally dependent on you helping him. If you just leave him there, you can't. His fate is not going to be a good one.
It's not going to be a good one, no. I mean, but he's a fantastic character. I mean, not only is he really well written, but once he's leveled up, he's a powerful wizard.
Well, he's a straightforward wizard. I think. What is because they all have subclasses wizards. What's his specialty?
I can't remember off the top of my head. Is it conjurer or something like that? Prestidigitator, something like that. I'm not sure, but he is basically. I mean, the way he works is like a classic wizard. He's got a really good array of spells.
Because with that end of D&D. With the speciality, the main thing is because every speciality has its opposite that you can't then cast any spells. So the main thing is to avoid you don't want something where invocation is the opposite or something like you don't want all the damaging spells to be kind of eliminated from your spell pool.
Yeah, right.
So there's a couple that are really bad, and then the rest are kind of so-so. It doesn't really make much of a difference.
Although they've really gone out of their way to kind of balance that out a little bit now. So, I've found that there's been a shift in the focus of D&D lately in terms of the tabletop game. It isn't so much based on combat anymore. It's way more based on plot and on narrative and character interaction. So it's kind of shifted the other way. So the spells that were more utilitarian once upon a time now have more use than they ever did before. Because it's because dungeon masters are creating situations where they're more useful.
That's reflected in Baldur's Gate 3 as well. You can cast things like friend in the middle of conversations to sway the conversations, to sway dice walls. So your magic roster can actually you can cast shapeshift. So there might be a situation where you'll meet a character who doesn't like drow, and your character's a drow wizard. So you can cast a shapeshift spell, so you appear as an elf, a sort of high elf, and just walk through without. And I like all of that. I love
that stuff. I mean, that's my bread and butter in any sort of role-playing game. I love that stuff. I mean, there are certain spells which are almost impossible to implement, like Wish, for example.
Oh yeah, I mean the way they handled it in Baldur's Gate 2 was kind of the best they could do, I guess.
Well, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, the wish spell is it's not even a spell that should really be available to characters as such, because it's the game changer. It's the ultimate spell.
Yeah.
The wish spell is the ultimate spell. I mean, you get that one chance to rearrange all of reality. If you include it in a game at all, then it's the pivot of the game.
Yeah, it becomes the game.
Yeah, it becomes the plot, doesn't it? I mean, either your characters are pursuing it for some reason, like they're cursed or something, or they've already used it and it has had very bad effects, and that is the impetus for the plot.
There's a whole bunch of very high level curses that can only be gotten rid of through wish and things like that.
Yes.
I think there's like a couple of them that are cast by God where you need like more than one wish spell to
actually get rid of them.
effect.
Yeah. And any dungeon master who knows D&D, but they will make the wish spell really rare. They won't be throwing like gin and genies at you left, right, and center.
No, that would be a mistake. I mean, one of the things I like about Disco Elysium is it basically does that computer game thing of just narrows down everything to just the non-combat.
Which is frankly what I like.
Yeah, I mean there are occasional odd combats. There's two big ones. The one you've encountered will be with combat is with
Measurehead.
Yeah, Measurehead. Which I do sometimes find that I'm even willing to like game the game and just save reload
until you get it. Yeah.
That takes a long time if you choose to do it. I've had a lucky one once in my first playthrough. It was pretty cool.
A friend of mine, he got it on his first try. He got the roundhouse kick on his first try. It was just a lucky dice roll.
If you don't roundhouse kick him as well, you can succeed and then fail, which is incredibly frustrating.
Oh.
You've got to know to roundhouse kick him. Otherwise, if you try anything else, it won't work.
Every time I tried, he crushed my hand and called me a name.
Yes, yeah, he
does. Every time.
He doesn't gain a lot of respect for you, even if you're not.
No, he doesn't. He pities you, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He treats you like a child, basically.
Yeah, I like to be done with Measurehead quite quickly. I do like the way he speaks.
The way he speaks is beautiful.
Weird way of expressing himself with the I love the Al Ghul and the inexplicably potato obsessed people.
Right. The way he refers to Kim as your pedomorphic friend. Yes. I love all that stuff. The over elaborate verbiage that he uses.
The fact that it's all basically a cover for his relationship problem.
Yeah, but I love that to bits. It's so funny.
Like he's not even really this guy that he's presenting himself as. He's just somebody who basically can't really do it with his girlfriend.
Right. It's just it's amazing. It's amazing stuff, and it's so elaborate. Like the philosophy, quote unquote, that he has created is so elaborate, but such bullshit. It's such a mountain of bullshit.
He's not even from the place that he's a supremacist.
The
whole thing is just completely in his head.
It's amazing, but he's so assured of it, isn't he? He's so certain of it, and expresses it beautifully. I mean, he does express it so beautifully.
That's what makes it so Don Quixote. Like, aside from the fact that you are literally Don Quixote with Sancho, like Kim is definitely Sancho, and you are definitely Don Quixote, and like the whole thing of Sancho is like the one who believes, and that's exactly what Kim is. He's the one who believes in you and takes you through
it's the sweetest relationship I've ever come across in a video game. It really is.
It works really well, and it allows for the absurdity of Harry to operate, really. The first time I played, I didn't discover that he was called Harry until I met the Union boss.
Everard, right? Well, you didn't,
and I didn't do that quite but my character came up with a name for himself because he failed a roll, and it was just a ridiculous name. But I just played it as he just kept insisting on this name. So right till the end, I can't remember what it was, but it was absolutely ridiculous, and Kim hated it every time I used this name. But I would introduce myself to people as this name, and I would, go around, and when people called me Harry, I'd be like, no, I'm blah, 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 blah. Because it's humorously suggested that Harry doesn't like his name. Harry doesn't actually like the name Harry. He likes his surname, but he doesn't like his forename. Yeah, he likes Dubois.
How I found out his name was Harry. It wasn't through Everard. It was earlier on than that. I can't remember who called it me first, though.
The corpse calls you Harry, which of course makes sense because the corpse is you. The corpse is so it's obviously part of your memory. But I think I did hear that, but I just discounted it because it's just a random thing.
Right, you just think, it could be anything, couldn't it? It could be an hallucination. It could be anything. But no, that is his name, Harry Dubois.
much to his own chagrin.
Yes, he is such a Harry as well, isn't he? I mean, the way
Yes.
he looks like a Harry.
Yeah. You can change how he looks a little bit with various things.
Oh God, I mean the character model. It's the way you look so ridiculous half the time, don't you? I mean, mine has been wandering around with marigolds on for God knows how long.
I don't think there are any clothes that look like the ones you start in aren't great, and they're probably the most sensible ones. You can wear a tracksuit. There's a biker jacket at one point that your character can become absolutely obsessed with. And I think that might be one of the items of clothes that, depending upon your stats, talks to you. I love the tie that talks, but
the mouthy necktie is the best character. I love it to bits.
My current character doesn't have the right stats to hear the mouthy necktie, so I just don't get it, which is sad because I do miss the necktie.
The way it talks, that sort of staccato way of talking that it has, where it just shouts everything.
Yeah, I do think it appears less and less as the game goes on. I think, probably just because the writers lost focus on the necktie,
right?
Essential dynamic,
which is fair enough, isn't it? I mean, just to have it at all is a joy.
Yeah, I love those early plot lines as well. Like I always remember the later ones and some of the more extravagant ones, and there's some really touching stuff, a lot of pathos towards the end of the game. But some of those early plot lines are so funny. The haunted bookshop, the cursed bookshop is
just brilliant. Plaisance and her books, and the way the fact that you notice she's trying to cast a spell on you is it's just the best. It's just the best, and the fact that she's a bookshop owner who doesn't like books, doesn't read.
Yes, yeah, she's one of the arch capitalist characters.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
You can earn a small fortune with her if you have that fort that allows you to earn money by saying capitalist things, because she gives you plenty of opportunities. You have to say some pretty vile things with her. You have to talk about how much you approve of her using her daughter as child labor as a way of raising a child and stuff. She's pretty unlikable, really.
Wow. Yeah. I felt really bad for harassing the woman outside the bookstore.
Oh yes, I mean that. I won't comment on that one because there's a lot there.
Oh, okay. I felt really bad for that because it's like Harry just wouldn't let it go. He just kept haranguing her.
One thing I will say is you should have pursued the she calls you a bird and you sort of brushed over that. But if you pursue that, you can then go into the shop and buy a book with toucans, with different birds. It's not toucans; it's another type of bird. Anyway, and you can buy it, and it talks about these different types, which are all, I think, completely fictional. There's there's a funereal one, and there's an extravagant one, and you pick which one you want to be your version of that bird, which becomes your heraldic sign symbol in your mind. It's this really bizarre subplot.
Absolutely brilliant. I'm going to do that. I'll go back and do that if it's an option.
She is. That is. And then you can go and tell her. About the bird that you picked, which she responds quite predictably and quite safely.
Yeah. It's Kim's reaction. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you harassing this random woman?
I think with the bird, he's just kind of like, I'm not going to pay attention.
Yeah. Kim is very wise, isn't he? Within his trusting milieu, he's actually very wise, and he knows when to step back from you.
He trusts you to get it done, and weirdly, if you play the game even half sensibly, he's not wrong.
He's not wrong, is he? It does work. You do sort of bumble along and somehow stumble into the correct answer. And
Kim's sense is he doesn't buy that your department sent you out to fail, and indeed that increasingly doesn't seem to be the case. Even though that's a very paranoid thought that Harry latches onto. It is typical sort of self-effacing, almost narcissistic self-debasing way. But so then he kind of just figures, well, then there must be a reason they sent you out to do this. So he kind of goes along with that. That very trusting way of his. but it can work out quite well.
Absolutely brilliant. I mean, I didn't know. I just randomly I was just reading reviews of it and whatnot, and I had no idea that Kim was actually gay.
Yeah, you don't necessarily always find
No
out.
idea.
You're in a playthrough. You can go for a playthrough without really. I think there's like very specific dialogue.
There's only one dialogue option, isn't there, where you can ask him directly and he'll answer yes, and that's it.
Yeah, he won't go into his personal life at all. Generally, like he's very averse to doing that. I don't think even necessarily because he's like hiding his personal life, but like I think he regards it as unprofessional.
Right, it's not part of his. He is so the officer of the citizens militia, isn't he? Yeah, that's it. That's his role.
Yeah, and like he's interesting because he's an interesting mix of cynic and idealist. Like I think he doesn't have, because he used to be a radical liberal when he was young. He talks about that at one point. That's what he used to admit to about himself. And then he sort of just basically kind of stops believing in it, but continues with it anyway.
Yeah.
But you get the sense that he wants something to believe in, and I think that's why he latches onto you so well, because of course you're the character who believes in pretty much anything.
Anything that he's exposed to, with it, if it serves, he'll believe it, won't he, Harry?
Yeah. And that's where you can play as any of the ideologies, allegedly even fascist, but I'm not particularly.
So I understand. You can apparently play it as a really ruthless, completely fascistic bastard.
Yeah, you can just adopt the fact, and you can get an achievement for doing that. I've got the achievement for the capitalist one. I've got the achievement for the communist one. I love the communist one. It's let me actually get that out, because that's one of my favorite achievements on Steam. It's just the best. Biggest communism builder. Employ critical theory 9 times. I think that's just like that is possibly. I mean, I'm not a big achievement person, but that's an achievement I'm very proud of.
That's a very cool one, I've got to say. Yes, I'd be proud of that one myself.
They've all got great names. The capitalist one is baddest hustler in the neoliberal hood.
I love it.
Yeah, they're all good. But
the writing in this game is second to none. I mean, it is second to none. It makes the only other game I can think of that even comes close is Pathologic 2.
It's got such a range of moods. That's the thing. I mean, I think even more than Pathologic 2, because Pathologic 2 definitely does a lot of things, and it does humor. But I think the
Pathologic 2 is definitely more. It's more dour than I'm desperate and tense than Disco Elysium.
Pathologic 2, like Darkwood, I think I saw a sort of video essay sort of talking about them together. I mean, they're both deeply steeped in Slavic horror, and
of course,
especially. So, like, that's their reference points. And I mean, I always find there's a director called Bellatar, whose work I love. I would recommend it, although you have to set aside some time. Like his shortest films are like 4 hours.
Right.
His longest film, which is famously long, and I find difficult to watch because it has a 20-minute cat torture sequence that I have to say even I find hard to stomach. The director had to answer a lot of questions about.
Really?
I don't think there was. By all indications, it wasn't. But there's a big urban legend that he tortured a real cat.
Right, got you.
But the mood, I again, like, absolutely don't think he did. He's a lovely guy by all accounts. But his films have the exact feel of Pathologic. Like,
right, now that is interesting.
The characters in them, the mood in them, everything. Like it's absolutely perfect.
Wow, that makes me want to go and see them, because Pathologic is kind of up there with Disco Elysium for me. It's easily top 3 video games of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm playing Darkwood right now. Again, I keep starting it and then getting frustrated and stopping, but I'm playing it.
Actually, I've got to. I was so bummed out last night. I did a video of I did the next episode of Darkwood, and we did the wedding sequence and we did the entrance to the Silent Forest, and it didn't record.
Oh, that's frustrating.
So, and unfortunately, it's not the kind of game where you can just go and load, because it doesn't load like it doesn't work like that. Once the days are done, the days are done. So I'm going to, because they are essential sequences in the game. So I'm going to start a new day. I'm going to get to the point with the wedding, record it, then do the Silent Wood entrance, then go back to my current save. So I've got the footage.
That makes sense, yeah.
Because it needs to be there. They're such essential sequences. They are such brilliant horror sequences, but they also feed into like the ethos of the entire game. It can't be without them, so it has to be done. And it's not. I mean, it's not that. It's about 8 days in. When
it's not impossible.
It's not that difficult. If I rush through, basically, I should be able to get the sequence, where you get the knock at the door and that you get the invitation to the wedding. One thing I noticed this time, when you get the invitation to the wedding, there's a picture of the sun up in the upper right hand corner. It's Celephais from the animated Watership Down. I didn't notice, but until this time round, it is directly from the intro to the animated Watership Down. It's Celephais, the god of the rabbits.
That's fantastic.
I did not notice. Right. I mean, it works so well. On that note, Rowan, shall we draw this one to a close?
Yes, I just got a thing on my earbuds that said battery low, so it's
brilliant. Okie dokes.
Yeah.
Well, and we come back and we will discuss further. What would you like to do next time round?
I'm actually trying to struggle. My head is so full of moving lately.
Of course.
It's kind of encompassed everything. Moving in boxes, just
right. Or would you just like to do like a subject-less chat?
Maybe. I mean, I'll think about something. I mean, there could be another Lovecraft. I really enjoyed we kind of covered them quite quickly this time, but I think that's because they're quite short, contained pieces.
Yes, and also very vivid pieces. I think they have such clear imagery and tones and whatnot. It was very easy to talk about them. So would you like to, maybe if we use, like this time around, maybe if we start with a Lovecraft retrospective?
Yeah, I think like maybe one of the longer pieces. I'll sort of think about a longer one. I think we talked about doing Dagon, and I think that's
we did. And it's a key one, isn't it? So
possibly that would appeal. And I think I think this time the picture in the house is probably the most classically Lovecraft story I've picked. Part of the reason why I picked it is I realized I was just kind of with Celephais and the music of Exad and Nyarlathotep and those ones. It's kind of I've been kind of consistently going for classical ones that are kind of odd and metaphysical.
Yeah, the slightly outre Lovecraft.
Yeah. So it was good to do a visceral horror one with like links to sort of cannibalism stuff, but longer ones are also ones that have kind of been missed out in our retrospectives. Possibly we could do because I can talk about sort of what I like and don't like about it. The Call of Cthulhu.
I'd love to do the Call of Cthulhu. I mean, it's the one that everyone recognizes, isn't it? For better or worse.
Yeah. And I'm very critical of it partly for that reason. But there are interesting things about it. And we talked a lot about the way he begins. And I've noticed this during these retrospectives, the way he begins story after story after story with these essayistic, and call them manifestos. Of course, the ultimate of all of those manifestos is the beginning of
the Call of Cthulhu, right? Of course.
That's the definitive Lovecraft manifesto. So it's almost worth it just on that ground.
Brilliant. So shall we say Call of Cthulhu?
Yeah, I think let's tentatively say Call.
Shall we? Okay, no worries. That sounds fabulous to me. That'll be almost a landmark one, I suppose. I imagine of all the Lovecraft retrospectives, that'll be the one that gets the most views, just because of what it is.
Yeah. I fear because you do these with other people, and I've used up all of the best ones.
It's all right. It's all right. If you know, it's always fun getting different perspectives.
Yeah.
You know, so that's no problem at all. We'll just do them again. I'll happily chat about them again. Is there anything before you go that you'd like to pimp out?
Just my website. I think right now, during the move, it's been a bit sort of more fallow, but rowantree-editing.uk, and my blog's on there, and links to other things like my Patreon, my YouTube account, which is pretty dead right now, but yeah, but my blog is fairly active most of the time.
Links below, ladies and gents, by the way. Brilliant. And as for myself, it's the same as usual. You can get me knocking about here on Exaggerated Elegy, where we're doing lots of different Let's Plays, and also a fairly elongated series on horror films at the moment, which has been great fun with Jack Graham and Elliot Chapman. That has been great fun. You can find links to all of my published fiction over at strangeplaygrounds.com. Most recently, of course, Born in Blood Volume 2, which Rowan was very, very kind to write the foreword for, which you can find over at perpetualmotionmachinepublications.com. And if you fancy chatting, you can find me over at Enigmatic Elegy on Twitter. And as per usual, links down below somewhere, scattered around down there somewhere. Rowan, that fantastic once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always enjoyable.
Always fun to catch up. Until next time, guys. Bye bye.